Started. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final installment of the Pink News Pride at Work webinar series. My name is Neil Hudson-Basing. My pronouns are he, him, and I identify as gay and queer, and I'm the Senior Events and Community Manager for Pink News. As always, our mission at Pink News is to inform, inspire, and empower, and we launch these webinars for a number of reasons. Firstly, as a way to engage with our growing business community to help create and encourage more inclusive, aware, and welcoming workplaces for the LGBTQ community. And across these three webinars, we've focused on groups that are often underrepresented in our community. We're covering a range of crucial conversation points and throughout an epic lineup of speakers, and today is no exception to that. Back in July, we kickstarted the series with a focus on neurodiversity. And in September, we celebrated the bi community to coincide with the 25th anniversary of Bi Visibility Day. And today we are focusing on the intersections of race, gender, and sexuality. Another reason for these webinars is built around the importance of Pride at work, Pride 365, because while awareness days and activities such as Pride Month, LGBTQ History Month, Black History Month are really important, it's crucial that queer people are able to show up as their authentic selves throughout the year. We spend a lot of time in the workplace, and so it's fundamental that we can freely and confidently bring our skills and expertise into our daily roles, as well as the intersections of our identities. This webinar series has been kindly sponsored by Lloyds Banking Group, and we're incredibly grateful to them for being so enthusiastic about supporting us, and we'll hear from them shortly. Each webinar has been carefully curated with our guest speakers to leave you feeling informed with lots of practical takeaways, myth busting, and actions so that you can be a more supportive and informed colleague and ally. There'll also be an opportunity for networking in the chat box, and I have to say it's great seeing people kind of introducing themselves already. And there'll be an opportunity to share throughout and ask any questions that you have for our panel, and we're built in time for Q&A. Today's webinar is entitled Race, Gender and Sexuality, Intersectional Pride in the Workplace and Beyond. Now, you've all read the Eventbrite description. We know that LGBTQ people from different ethnic backgrounds experience racism, transphobia, homophobia in everyday life, from microaggressions through to kind of like, violence everywhere in the workplace, socializing, on dating apps. And that's just to name a few examples. We don't need to go too much into that, but we know there's lack of representation at leadership level, lack of diversity, inequality with across like kind of pay gaps and disparities, poorer health outcomes. And we know in the world of business that representation at leadership level, whether it comes to campaigns and opportunities, is something that is really lacking and needs to be worked on. And in the workplace, you have things like outdated stereotypes and views, how those barriers play a major kind of like role in not allowing people to advance in the way that they should. Understanding how the intersections of race, gender, and sexuality impact someone's lived experiences is key in ensuring that employees can bring their authentic selves into the workplace, their professional roles. And organisations need to create safe and inclusive spaces where Black queer people and queer people of colour can thrive with pride in who they are, what they deliver, and what they can achieve. Why is it so important to have this conversation? These conversations are not new. We know that they need to be had in order to make change. But we also know that racism is still a problem in the UK, including in the workplace. In a recent Pink News article, we covered new research which reveals how that Black Gen Z employees still face racism and hurdles when it comes to being their authentic selves in the workplace. Tap-In, a social agency, recently published its second edition of their This is Black Gen Z report, surveying over 23,000 Black Gen Z employees, and the results were startling. 58% of Black 18 to 24-year-olds experienced racism in the workplace in the last 5 years. 52% of 25 to 34-year-olds experienced the same. 85% said that authenticity at work was key for job satisfaction, yet nearly half felt unable to be themselves in the workplace, with this number rising to 63% for Black LGBTQ Gen Z and 91% for Black trans workers. With many reporting needing to change their appearance, adjusting their behaviour and expressions, softening their accents, and toning down their mannerisms so as not to appear too queer. And all of this in a country that apparently isn't systemically racist. You can check out the article in the resources section. Please do, we encourage you to do so. We are so pleased today to be joined by a fantastic range of role models and thought leaders who are paving the way for young LGBTQ, Black and people of colour folk to be able to be their authentic selves in the workplace and beyond through their incredible work, campaigning and passion. And though their journeys haven't always been easy, we're really grateful to welcome them here today. And we know that many people find conversations around race uncomfortable. Well, all I'd say to that is let's get comfortable being uncomfortable, because it's the only way that things are going to change and we're going to achieve proper inclusion. So throughout all of this, I'd also like to emphasize the need to not lose sight of the importance of queer joy, Black joy and success, and we'll be making sure that that is a focus throughout. So let's go through a little bit of virtual housekeeping. I'll start by saying that we wish to create a safe space for sharing, learning, celebrating, whether virtually or in person, and certainly one free from any abuse, harassment, or discrimination. Please keep the conversation kind and respectful. We reserve the right to remove anyone who isn't. Ask questions, be curious, but we don't debate people's lived experience here. I'll now take you through Zoom, which is our virtual platform for today's session. We're using Zoom Events, which is a bit like Zoom Webinar, but much fancier. We can't see or hear you, but you can communicate with us in a number of ways. Starting with the Q&A box, the chat box. Keep your thoughts, comments, intros coming in. We love to see them. And there's also the Q&A box. If you have any questions, please pop them in there so we don't lose them in the chat box. You can upvote on the questions you most want to see answered by clicking the thumbs up symbol, and that boosts them to the top. There's also our polls and resource section, and I'm just going to launch our first poll now. Give me 2 seconds, and I'll get that going in a second. Closed captions are enabled in the interest of accessibility and inclusivity should you need them, and you can activate these by clicking the CC button located in the Zoom taskbar. The webinar will be recorded and will be shared post-event with everyone who registers and more widely. Please do share your thoughts and comments throughout. It helps to bring these conversations to a wider audience beyond the event itself, and I'll share the hashtags and our handle in the chat box shortly. And finally, we want to encourage you to look after your well-being over the next few hours. Some of the topics that might come up, while they're important, they also might be sensitive, hard-hitting and triggering. So if you need to step away from your computer, please do so. There is a scheduled comfort break midway, but look after yourself, and you can always dip back into the recording at a later date. And I'll be in the background if you have any questions at all, should you require anything, alongside my colleague Eric, who will be supporting in the chat box. So do give Eric a hello. I'm going to welcome our first speaker onto the screen with me. I'd like to introduce Sam Owo, Group Head of DEI at Lloyds Banking Group, our sponsors for our Pride at Work webinar series. And Sam would like to say a few words about why this is important to Lloyds and to welcome you all. Good morning, Sam.
Good morning, Neil, and thank you very much.
So good to see you.
Oh, good to see you too. And may I say first, how delighted I am here to be able to join you today, and particularly to introduce the call with you today, Neil. And a big welcome to you all. And thank you so much for everybody coming along onto this session. So as Neil said, I am Sam Owo. I'm Head of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at Lloyds Banking Group. And I am super proud that we've been able to work so closely with PinkNews this year, sponsoring this webinar series, as well as being the headline sponsor for this year's PinkNews Awards. We've got a fantastic lineup today, and I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone, other experts on the call, as well as your views too throughout the day. I think we all know it's been an extremely challenging year for many LGBTQ plus people. And we've been continuing to move forward to support all our LGBTQ plus colleagues and community. So I'm really proud that our commitment to this agenda comes right from the top of our organization. And this year we've been running ourselves a number of listening sessions, which with some of our colleagues across our LGBTQ plus, particularly more recently, we did a session with our asexual, bisexual and pansexual colleagues with our CEO. We've also just announced that our group exec committee member will get closer to supporting our colleague networks, including the LGBTQ plus network Rainbow, to support them in really moving forward and dialing up every area of concern or barriers that they're experiencing, but particularly also to support increased collaboration across our colleague networks. Now, we have a really diverse group of people as part of our colleague networks, and we're always looking at ways to be more intersectional. And we're not alone. I'm sure, like some of you on the call today, that have an LGBTQ plus network and want to include more diversity. And we're very thoughtful about how we do that, particularly with people who are Black, Asian, and or from minority ethnic backgrounds. So we need to see more role models who can demonstrate to our colleagues that Lloyds is a really good, safe place for them, so that they can be themselves and bring their greatness into the workplace. And we've been running a number of initiatives and events in our organization for so many years now. And we've previously supported Black Pride as headline sponsors. And we've just last week, also as part of Black History Month, our Rainbow Network ran a Black, Queer and Fabulous session, which was very insightful because we had people really sharing their different stories and their experience of being Black and queer. And I've led a number of individuals to really feel connected and create amazing space for people to be themselves, which is a wonderful thing that we've been able to do. But you won't be surprised that I then say we know we don't have all the answers. So we look at collaborations across the sector with other organizations to really get a broader view as much as we can. And we've recently partnered with Proud HR to host a panel of Black queer professionals to also discuss their experience in the workplace and to provide the opportunities for us to network with them, but also learn lessons as well. We've also been doing more to support our colleagues' mental health with our networks training even more LGBTQ plus mental health advocates. So we've focused really on ensuring all of our colleagues feel like this is an inclusive place of work for them and where they can truly be their selves, build a career, fulfill their potential. But as I say, we know we've got more to do and we will continue to do that. So there are so many amazing people for you to listen to today. And I'm going to stop talking now and again say a big thank you for having me. And I hope you all enjoy and find all the sessions super valuable.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you very much for Lloyds Banking Group and your support and enthusiasm for Pink News generally today, the awards and the incredible work you do. And I heard that the Proud HR event the other day was wonderful. So congratulations. And yeah, look forward to continuing working with you in the future.
Thank you, Neil.
Thanks, Sam. So our keynote speaker for today, she just joined us on screen, Jacqui Rhule-Dagher. So Jacqui is an associate at Hogan Lovells in her day job and a writer, campaigner and all-round role model in her gay job with lots of crossover between the two. Jacqui is involved in so many DEI initiatives, including having founded Legally Lesbians. She's written for Diva, The Lawyer and Metro, and she's award winner as well as being one of the most wonderful people I've personally met this year. So Jacqui, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you doing, Neil? How's everyone doing? I'm loving the conversations we're having in the chat box.
It's great to see them coming through. It kind of helps to bring the event to life, and we'll be dipping into that chat box and the Q&A box afterwards. Just to remind people that throughout the day, share your thoughts and comments, share your questions in the Q&A box. Jacqui's made time to get asked your questions, and we often find that the rich stuff is kind of like following the presentations and talks in that Q&A box, and we're looking forward to dipping into that. So Jacqui, over to you for your talk, Intersectionality and Me.
Sure. Thank you very much, Neil, for that very generous introduction. So yes, I'm Jacqui Rhule-Dagher and my pronouns are she and her. Happy Trans Awareness Month. So when I'm talking to people in situations like this, I tend to remind them that I have, as Neil said, a day job and a gay job. So as part of my day job, I am a lawyer at Hogan Lovells International LLP, and I sit in the complex litigation group. I assist clients with a range of legal issues and things such as fraud, misrepresentation, shareholder disputes, and breach of contract. I decided I wanted to be a litigator because I wanted a career that was cerebral, that was very dynamic, that required me to think strategically, that had a close relationship with black letter law, and I'm happy to say that I've never regretted my decision. I'm also involved in a number of D&I initiatives, as Neil said. I sit on the steering committee for the Pride Network, and I'm also part of the Real Network, which stands for Race and Ethnicity at Hogan Lovells. As part of my gay job, I sit on the steering committee for the Law Society's LGBTQ Solicitors Network, and I'm one of just 16 lawyers from England and Wales who are tasked with ensuring that LGBTQIA lawyers are thriving and not just surviving within the legal industry. And we do this by going into different organizations to discuss best practice. We analyze data, we create articles, and we also prepare, as I said, educational materials. So yeah, that's pretty much my introduction in a nutshell. So I just want to share a slide with you all this morning, well, a couple of slides, but here we go. So, right. So there's a lion, the tube, Dalston Superstore, a Legally Lesbians article in the Real Network up here. So what could they possibly have in common? So when I first entered the legal industry, I was so deep in the closet that I could have convincingly played Aslan in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, complete with the mane. My Monday morning routine into the city typically consisted of thinking of answers on the tube to the much dreaded question, what did you do at the weekend? Because I was terrified of outing myself if I revealed too much. I was a very different person back then. I was afraid that I was too much of a lesbian to be considered black, and that I was too black to be considered a proper lesbian. And I think that one of the main reasons for this is the lack of representation in the media of black lesbians, but lesbians generally, never mind black ones. And I think the legal industry was a very different place too back then. It was very homogenous, very conservative, and very traditional. I think D&I initiatives were seen as nice to have, but certainly not a necessity, or they were considered to be a self-indulgent frivolity that was essentially a distraction. And of course, nobody said to me, oh, Jacqui, if you come out, it will ruin your career. But there was certainly a sense that as a black person, it'd be hard enough. Why would you possibly want to put your sexuality into the mix too? So my Monday morning routine into the city, as I said, typically consisted of looking at answers, thinking about the much dreaded question, what did you do at the weekend? And one day I slipped up and I said to a colleague that I had been to the Dalston Superstore. And well, you can imagine my relief when she thought that I was a DIY enthusiast. Now, eventually, I was introduced to another lesbian lawyer who was a senior associate at another firm. And she said to me, you know, what really matters is that you're a good lawyer and that you are known as the lawyer who happens to be a lesbian and not a lesbian lawyer. And those words have always stayed with me. Around a year or so later, I started my training contract at Clifford Chance. This is the first time that I had the opportunity of working with other lesbian lawyers. And this was really life affirming. I can't overstate the importance of visibility, because if you don't see people who look like you, you can start to think there's something wrong with the way that you look. And this is certainly how I felt. And I realized that actually most people were just interested in your work product and not how you spent your social life. Around 6 months into my training contract, I was seconded to the Dubai office, and the secondment is when you either go to a client or go overseas. And I chose to go to Dubai because I have family out there. And when I got to Dubai, I was back in the closet again. But this time it wasn't because of reasons of shame, but more because of safety. Unfortunately for me, while I was in Dubai, I was outed by another person who was on secondment. And I remember tossing and turning the whole night thinking, orange is not your color and you're definitely no pussy. How are you going to survive if you are locked up? But actually, luckily, my fears didn't come to fruition and I managed to make some really good friends as part from the underground Dubai LGBT scene. So that was very nice. When I go back to England, I had the confidence to apply to become the firm's trainee LGBT rep. And I was selected, although this is a bit of a hollow victory as there weren't many people going for the role. But I was then responsible for ensuring that other trainees could thrive in their profession and they were supported. Now, unfortunately, when I left Clifford Chance, I was back in the closet again. I keep on mentioning this because I think it's important for people to realize that coming out is not a one-time event. You constantly have to make a judgment call as to whether it's safe to do so, whether it's even worth it. And sometimes it's just very tiring. And so, yes, I spent the next 18 months back in the closet again. I'm now at Hogan Lovells, where I've been for the past 2.5 years, and I'm really happy here. I think I'm very fortunate in that 3 of the partners are out, at least that I know of, and 2 of them are lesbians, one of whom spent her entire 23-year career at the firm. Now, I'm also very lucky that the firm is genuinely committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this was evidenced a few weeks ago when we hosted the inaugural Love All Festival, where Neil, Alex, Tolu, and Z came to support. And this was to celebrate National Inclusion Week. And the theme was Dress to Express, where we encourage people to wear national dress or any other colours, themes, or textures that represented their identities. And Neil was a proud prize winner. He won one of the best dress prizes, and you can see why. And it's just great to see the city come alive. And because Hogan Lovells is committed to these sort of initiatives, it means that my role is a lot easier. And so, yeah, that's pretty much my journey. It's had more twists and turns than an episode of RuPaul's Drag Race, but I wouldn't change anything. And I'm very happy to be at this point. So how do I navigate being a Black lesbian in the city? Well, first and foremost, I remember that I'm a lawyer before anything else. I'm not a D&I specialist. And I think it's important that I tell myself this, because I think sometimes when you are Black or LGBTQI or both, you feel personally responsible for your organization's D&I initiatives, when actually it's incumbent on everyone to drive them forward. And I'm very lucky that Hogan Lovells takes D&I very seriously. It leverages the strength of its people and adopts a multifaceted approach to D&I. It's one of the 5 strategic pillars of the firm, on par with putting clients at the center of everything that we do. And it's no coincidence there's a separate D&I function which reports to the firm's CEO. And because I'm visibly out, I can now be the person for other people that I needed to see when I first entered the legal industry. I'm reluctant to use the word role model, but if that's how people see me, then that can only be a positive thing. So yeah, that's how I navigate my way around the city. I'd also like to touch upon some of the challenges that being Black and LGBTQI individuals face in the city. And I think one of those major challenges is a lack of understanding surrounding intersectionality. So intersectionality is a term that was coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, and she was a law professor at Columbia University. And she was looking at the ways in which African-American women were doubly discriminated against. So they could either bring a cause of action in sexism or in racism, but not both. And in one of the cases, the judge said that if he allowed these women to bring a cause of action, both sexism and racism, they would essentially have 2 swings of the bat, which wouldn't be fair. So intersectionality looks at the ways in which characteristics such as class, gender, race combine, intersect, and overlap in order to create unique experiences for those from marginalized communities. So when I'm explaining intersectionality, I like to remind people that I may face racism differently to a Black man by virtue of my gender, and I may face sexism differently to a white woman by virtue of my race. So Crenshaw was reminding people that when you're looking at things like equality, it's important to recognize that characteristics don't operate in silos, and that people are likely to have more than one thing they're discriminated against. So I think another issue that people face is an expectation of an education. So why is Sharon Osbourne up on my screen? So basically back in March 2021, Sharon Osbourne was then a co-host of The View. And she was having a very heated discussion with her co-host, Cheryl Underwood, about Piers Morgan's treatment of the Duchess of Sussex. And Sharon was essentially supporting him. Now, this obviously involved lots of different discussions about racism, which I won't go into, but there was one part of the show where Sharon says, "Educate me and teach me." And I remember recoiling in horror thinking, wow, that's quite entitled. And I think there's an expectation placed on people from minority communities to educate. And actually, that's not our role. If people want to share their stories, they're very welcome to, but there shouldn't be an expectation on us to do so. And I think that everyone has the responsibility for taking control of their own learning and development. I mean, I wouldn't go up to a partner at my firm and say, "Teach me everything that you know about the law." I mean, I could, but I get some quite unusual looks if I did. And so, yes, I think, and we all have the responsibility to take control of our own learning. And I think that if people are happy to share their stories, it's important that we remember that the words silent and listen contain the same letters. And by that, I mean not automatically jumping in and saying, "Oh, I don't believe you," because that's not your lived reality. If people have been kind enough to share their experiences, it's important to validate them. I think microaggressions are another issue that we face. And I think I call them microaggressions, but it's actually quite a funny term. People tend to focus on the micro, not the aggression part. And some of the things I've heard over the years are, "You speak really well. Well, why wouldn't I?" Or, "I feel really sorry for you. Your friends must be really homophobic." I mean, an aunt did once say to me, "Hurry up and get married before people think you're Homo sapien." But I have had worse advice. I think it's important to remember that Black people are not a monolith. We come in all different shapes, sizes, and guises. And just because you know one other Black lesbian doesn't mean she's going to be the same as me based on her age or whether she's neurodiverse or her religion, for example. So I think it's important to treat people as you find them. And then there are unconscious biases whereby you think that people are going to be a certain way based on your preconceived ideas on how you think they should be. And actually, as I said, it goes back to teaching people, to thinking about people as themselves and not as a monolith. So what can organizations do to welcome people who have multiple intersecting identities? I think first and foremost, it's very important for them to utilize their employee resource groups, ERGs. And what you often find in organizations is that you'll have a women's network or a pride network or an ethnicity network, but very rarely do those networks come together. So when I was at Clifford Chance, I saw this. I'd go to meetings and quickly realized that actually people were hoping, striving for the same things. So I set up an initiative called Carnival Comes to Clifford Chance, whereby the Pride Network and the BAME Network joined forces to hold a summer party and to raise awareness about intersectionality. And we had speakers from Channel 4 and Stonewall come in to discuss best practice and what organizations can do to foster a greater sense of inclusion. I think, as I said, it's really important for ERGs to work together. I also think it's particularly important that there's a firm-wide support for these initiatives. I think oftentimes you may find the Pride Network taking care of Pride events and the BAME Network taking care of Black History Month events, but I think it's particularly helpful when the whole firm buys into this. I think it's also important that organizations are transparent about their data. And so if we're looking at the gender pay gap, for example, does this have an intersectional focus? Are we looking at how ethnic minorities are paid, for example, because this differs compared to other women? And so I think it's also important to make sure that if you have intersectional data, that you're looking at it very, very carefully so as not to miss any blind spots. I also think it's important for organizations to have regular training sessions on things such as microaggressions and unconscious bias. And I think it's a lot of organizations do already have them. But I think what's particularly helpful is if these organizations span the breadth of characteristics. So looking at how age and religion have ensure that you have a different experience, or how being part of the LGBTQI community and being from a lower socioeconomic background will impact your experiences as well. And I think that we should be encouraging people to use pronouns. Now, it doesn't take very long to change an email signature, but this does go a long way in making people feel welcome and included. And so, yeah, I think we should definitely be encouraging that. And significantly, I think it's important for people to not feel as though they're the lonely only, with the spotlight shining on them. Now, as I said, I'm very happy at Hogan Lovells. I think that one of the reasons for this is that I don't feel compelled to take part in D&I initiatives. If I want to take part in them, then I do. If I feel passionate about them, then I will. But there's certainly no expectation on me. And I think that sometimes if you're if you're Black or LGBTQI or both, you can sometimes feel that it's your responsibility to push forward the D&I agenda. When actually, as I said, it's incumbent on everyone to push forward these initiatives and make sure that they're successful. And finally, I want to talk about allyship. So when we think of allies, we often think of people from majority groups amplifying the voices of those from marginalized communities. And actually, this is an important part of allyship. But what often isn't spoken about is how people from marginalized groups can be allies to each other. So I'm always trying to think of the ways in which I can uplift my trans siblings. If someone misgenders them, I make sure that I correct them, even if they're not in the room. I think it's very important to get those good habits in place. And so in talking about people from marginalized communities being allies to each other, one of the partners at my firm is a Black lawyer. And back in 2022, during Pride Month, she shared my coming out story to her large social media following. And this was a really lovely full circle moment for me, because it reminded me of both how far the legal industry had come and how far I had come from when I was thinking of answers on the tube to the much dreaded question of, what did you do at the weekend? And yeah, it's not always been an easy journey, but it has always been worth it. And I'm glad that I have come to this point, and I'd like to thank all the people that have brought me here. I think that's a nice way to end this morning's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqui. I'm just going to stop sharing your screen if that's okay, and then they'll be able to see us. Perfect. So firstly, thank you so much for sharing. Eric's just popped a nudge in the chat box, but if you do have any questions for Jacqui, then please do pop them in the Q&A box, and we've got plenty of time to work through them. Jacqui, one of the things I love about this series is there are so many, there's been quite a few mic drop moments. And you dropped a couple in there that I'd just like to pull out if that's okay.
Sure, please.
Firstly, that silent and listen contain the same letters. What do you think are the barriers to people just taking a back seat and actually listening to people's lived experience as opposed to jumping in with their own kind of predetermined thoughts on that? You know, why do people struggle to listen and take it on board?
Definitely. But I think one of the main reasons is people are scared of confronting their own biases. So if you tell me something and I'm guilty, but I've done that myself, I think, oh God, that's awful. So I think your automatic response is to go into defense mode. But I think we need to get past that. As you said, we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable and thinking about our own prejudices, how we can only take responsibility for our own behavior, right? So thinking about the ways in which we have sometimes been complicit in injustice and these microaggressions, and moving on and educating ourselves with grace and compassion. But yeah, I think maybe a sense of inner guilt is the reason why people jump in automatically.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that it is, you know, these things are only going to get easier to talk about the more and more we do it. You know, people seem so scared to say the word black or say the word disabled or queer,
Yeah,
and actually it's kind of just about acknowledging that that is what we're talking about here. So just accept it, and then it just becomes so much easier to just,
definitely.
yeah,
But I
address
am
it.
black and I'm proudly black. I don't mind. There's no point saying the woman with the black and white shirt, the one wearing like bright eyeshadow. I mean, you could just describe me as that. It's fine. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that, you know, I think the same with the word gay or queer. You know, I'm kind of like, it's what I identify as. Use
Exactly.
it, you know. It's and you know, and when it comes to the intersections, it's okay that someone has those intersections. They have them. Just deal with it. The other mic drop moment was microaggression, and people focus on the micro part
Yeah,
of that. And I quite similarly, I always talk about passive aggressiveness. Sure, it might be a bit toned down, but it's still aggressive. It's still a form of
absolutely.
aggression. What are how have you kind of processed them and learned to call them out over time?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult when you're in a hierarchical organization, and I think it's fair to say the legal industry is very hierarchical. So if a partner, let's say, made a comment, I think some people are very reticent about pulling them up on it. But I just believe in two phrases: that made me uncomfortable, and interesting. Why do you think that? That's a polite but firm way of calling people out and giving them a chance to explain themselves, and also protecting yourself. So yeah, those are things that I tend to do. But sometimes they are, and they're not funny, but they're just so awful that you can't help but laugh. Because if
Yeah.
you don't laugh, you'll cry. So yeah, that's how I get around it.
It's always interesting watching people's responses to those two responses as well. Obviously, I elaborated a little bit early on the report that we recently covered from Tap In around kind of like, you know, Black Gen Z.
Mm,
Um, I guess that confidence to call out these things comes over time and with
definitely.
experience as well. You know, for a younger person, it might be a bit more difficult.
And in those situations, I'd say call on your colleagues, build your tribe. You know, when I was growing up, you very rarely saw other, as I said, lesbians, never mind black ones. But now that things are changing, you can, you know, there's lots of people on the internet that you can get in touch with. There's employee resource groups, as I touched upon. So yeah, build your tribe, and that will give you strength and confidence to, you know, call out microaggressions, to challenge unconscious bias, and to educate people if you want to. But as I said, there's not a responsibility on you to push forward the D&I initiative.
Not at all. And I think that visibility is really important here when it comes to finding your tribe and knowing who that you can call on in those moments. So just for you being so visible and so kind of out there is so important to so many people. So thank you.
Thank
We've
you.
got Carmen popped in the chat box. Another mic drop from Jacqui. If you don't laugh, you'll cry. Carmen also has a question for you.
Sure.
How do you deter whiteness in your denture whiteness in your DEI initiatives in the law sector with an overwhelming white community?
Did you mean decenter?
Decenter, yes.
Okay. That's a very good question. I think people are getting a lot better at having difficult conversations. And we have such, I'm very lucky to, and especially at my firm, to have such good allies. So if a conversation is careering down one end, I'm very fortunate that there are people around me that will take away the emotional labor of me having to say, actually, can we bring this back to what we're here to discuss, which is the Black experience. So yeah, I like the importance of having good allies, and yeah, having if you can feel confident and strong enough to say, actually, this conversation is about a certain group of people. We're here to talk about their issues today. I think, as I said, in the same way of saying that makes me uncomfortable, that can help people focus their attention back onto why you're in the room. But it's not always easy. I'm not going to lie, especially when you're the only one in the room. So, for example, a lot of for the LGBTQ network at the Law Society, up until 2 weeks ago, I was the only person of colour for almost 2 years. And so you can imagine there's some quite challenging conversations that come up. And I'm confident enough to not call people out, but sort of say, oh, have you thought about things this way? But not everyone can do that. So I can't overstate the importance of allies and building your community.
We're probably going to touch on kind of like visibility in queer spaces. You know, one of the reasons that we're doing these series is to focus on underrepresented groups within the queer community, within the workplace and outside of the workplace as well, kind of, you know, in whether it's staff networks or social spaces. What more needs to be done to make queer spaces truly diverse? Because we, particularly I'm talking about kind of the gay scene and pride events, it feels, and I say this as one, it feels like it's typically built for white gay men. You know, how are we going to break through that?
Oh gosh, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I'd say follow Lady Phil's template of UK Black Pride, which is genuinely inclusive. I'm sure we'll talk about this later on, but it's such a warm and inviting space that I call it the great exhale. You know, you go in there, you don't have to worry. There's great food, great music, and as fantastic allies helping. I know that you were helping out, Neil, and some other people from the community too. But I think, yeah, the more we can support initiatives like UK Black Pride, the more we'll be able to bring other people on board and make them appreciate the importance of having diverse spaces. But it is very difficult. I don't think the LGBTQI scene has moved that much forward in the years that I've certainly been going out and what have you. So there's a lot of work to be done. It's moving in the right direction. But as I said, support initiatives like UK Black Pride, support initiatives that do centre people from marginalised groups and listen to their stories. I mean, Hogan Lovells has an initiative called A Minute with Me, whereby people from the firm talk about their experiences, something that's unique about them. So listen to people's stories, if they're willing to share, as I said, and then you'll see the benefits that diversity brings to the table.
I love that. A Minute with Me. That sounds great. It is good to see kind of like the scene is changing. It seemed to go backwards for a while, but there are more events popping up. You know, the London's lesbian scene is absolutely thriving at the moment, and it's great to see. You know, we've got Alex hosting later, and Alex is the CEO for House of Pride, which kind of creates events and kind of opportunities for queer women and trans and non-binary folks. So you're right, it is heading in the direction. It just sometimes feels
your events too, Neil. We have to support your events too. I mean, I think they're fantastic. It's a good way. I think alcohol can sometimes be. It's not always very inclusive. Whereas, non-alcoholic parties are a great way to meet people and just chat. Sometimes that's what you do.
Yeah, queer sober spaces provide a real opportunity to kind of like, let those relationships thrive naturally without the need for booze. So yeah, thank you. We've got a question from Mark. Jacqui, thank you so much for your presentation. I was wondering if you had any advice around increasing engagement within new Pride network communities and how can we support those who might be afraid to ask questions?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think you can have an anonymous Dropbox. That's what we have at work as well, whereby if people are afraid to ask things, this is usually around race, they can ask the questions anonymously. Obviously, the person who's controlling the box knows who asked the question. I think that's a good way for people to ask questions in a healthy, safe space. And also, in terms of encouraging engagement, ensuring that not just people from the community go to events, if possible, making sure that allies are going to. And I think it was Vodafone who hosted an event which the allies put on for the LGBTQ community. And I thought that was a fantastic way of showing that this is something the organisation took very seriously and also taking the load off of the Pride network. So yeah, allyship, anonymous messaging, and making sure that everyone goes to events.
That's really important, that kind of like that active allyship. And that's a really beautiful example, actually. You talked about the expectation to educate.
Yeah.
Now, I heard this was really, really resonant during the Black Lives Matter movement a few years ago during COVID, where it's not a minority person's job to always educate people, right? I always say during events, there is enough information out there now. There's many influencers and activists and books out there to educate yourselves. Where would you say to someone to start? Because I get that sometimes as an ally, you want to show up, but it can be overwhelming. In terms of you being part of the community, but also proudly being an ally to yourself, I think we definitely share that in common, like many people here today.
Yeah.
Where do you start?
I don't mean to be facetious, Neil, but Google. As with everything else,
Yeah.
you Google it or go on Amazon, the best
Yeah.
authors in terms of, Black LGBTQ writers. There's so much information out there. And I think it's important to get your information from different sources. I mean, we all know about the WhatsApp group aunties that send daily prayers and prophecies with no sort of fact checks. But yeah, we need to get our information from different sources. But Google's a fantastic starting point. Use it for everything else. So why not this?
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say for me personally, Instagram communities, the Instagram community, yes, social media comes with its limitations and sometimes a little bit of discomfort, but actually Instagram communities are a great way to, people following people on Insta. And Denise says it feels like unconscious bias has lost flavor or importance of meaning over the last few years. Many organizations have replaced this with conscious inclusion. I'd be really interested to know your thoughts on that.
I think there's definitely a place for a training surrounding unconscious bias.
Sure,
definitely,
sure.
I'm still affected by it quite regularly, so I can say that it's still very, very present. But yeah, training sessions can help with that needs. I think we need to, and I said if they span the breadth of characteristics, that can be particularly helpful. And actually making sure that the importance of these sessions is communicated. I think sometimes people just see them as a tick box exercise. I've just got to get through this over lunchtime as quickly as possible. But actually making people understand why it's important and how their own behaviour impacts their colleagues' experiences in the workplace.
Yeah, I think we're in a day and age where people can see through tick box now, particularly absolutely, particularly Gen Z when they're looking for roles. They know what they're looking for now.
Exactly, and they'll hold your feet to the fire. They'll say to you, how many people have you got from this group, and where are the blind spots, and what are you doing to to further D&I initiatives? So, and I love that. I'm here for all of it.
Oh, for sure. It's not, it's not just Gen Z that are looking for it. Let's not do ourselves a disjustice either.
Exactly.
We're looking for it as well. Whether someone's transition at work policy or their menopause policy is kind of like, genuine and authentic for staff. Lee says, thank you for taking time with us today, Jacqui. I was wondering if you have pointers on how to best support people coming out at work, not encouraging them so much, but letting them know they're safe if they do want to be themselves in the workplace. I want to make sure there's authenticity in these acts and that they don't seem performative.
Sure. So there are three things I would say. First of all, have visible symbols. They can sometimes be a little bit tokenistic, but I always make sure that I wear my pride pin and my pride lanyard. And the reason for that is when I first entered the legal industry and I couldn't find anyone that looked like me, I was always so happy when I'd see someone wear a pride pin or have a pride rainbow mug or what have you, because it just said, okay, you're welcome here. And secondly, I'd say use pronouns and use inclusive language. If you're talking about someone, don't assume they've got a husband or a wife, or just, how's your partner or how's your other half even. And I think it's, just listening to people's stories and being cognizant of the fact that coming out is a continuous process. So they may come out to you, doesn't mean they come out to everybody, but just ensuring that they know that you're here for them, you're an ally. Those are the things that I'd recommend.
That coming out process, people are talking about this a lot lately, and I'm really enjoying it. Do you think we ever stop? Do you think it is just really continual? It feels like that at the moment.
I think it is continual. And unfortunately, there's not an Instagram page or a TikTok page where every single LGBTQI person in the world has listed their status, where you can just go and look it up. So I think it's a continuous process and journey. But I don't mind it now. I'm happy that it's when I choose not to come out, it's because of safety and not shame. I think that's the key thing.
That's it. I've learned to embrace the joy and the power in it almost. Yeah.
Absolutely. And seeing someone else's eyes light up when they see they've got a familiar friend, that's a really special thing.
Those small moments and small acts of putting your pronouns or something, I have a really bold he/him badge that I wear to most events now, even if it's not a queer event, I'll generally wear it. They're so simple, yet why do so many people struggle with them? Why is there so much barrier and resistance to it, do you think?
I think sometimes people fear that they're not going to be taken seriously, or they may just not want to draw attention to themselves, or maybe they've got internalized homophobia. I think multitude of reasons why. But I'm always very happy to wear the pride lanyard, the pride flag, the whole shebang, because I'm proud of who I am and I want others to be proud of who they are too.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful note to finish on. Jacqui, you're going to be back with us for the panel discussion later. Thank you so much for your presentation, and we'll see you shortly.
Thanks so much for your time, everyone. Goodbye.
See you in a bit. So thank you so much, Jacqui. I hope that you enjoyed that. If you have any other questions for Jacqui, please do drop them in the Q&A box. What a great way to kickstart today. Our next speaker is none other than Professor Patrick Vernon OBE. Good morning, Patrick. How are you?
Good morning, Neil. It's really just great hearing Jacqui. A real inspiration.
Absolutely.
She's stealing some of my thunder, but it's good. It's all good.
Patrick, you have your own thunder, and I'm going to give you a quick intro if that's okay. Patrick is a public speaker, broadcaster, campaigner, EDI advisor, social commenter, writer, and author. And an absolute legend, if I do say so myself. Patrick comes with an expansive set of thoroughly deserved accolades, including his OBE, honorary degrees, and Lifetime Achievement Award. Patrick is well known for campaigning for National Windrush Day and for helping to expose the Windrush scandal. In 2020, Patrick was selected by British Vogue as one of Britain's top 20 campaigners, as one is included in the 2020 Power List of 100 influential Black people in Britain. In the same year, he co-authored 100 Great Black Britons, which is amazing and features a number of remarkable Black LGBTQ role models, game changers, and icons. It is an absolutely fabulous book. If you have not bought it, please go and do so. Patrick is a true ally to the LGBTQ community, and PinkNews would like you to join us in giving him a very warm welcome for his presentation, Finding the Black and POC LGBTQ Voice, Authenticity in the Workplace. Patrick, over to you.
Thank you very much, and it's really an honour to be part of this and the series of events. And credit to you, Neil, in terms of the work that you're doing as well. Yeah, I'm a straight Black male, but I've always seen myself as an ally to the LGBT community. I've been involved in I've supported many initiatives and campaigns over the years, and I've also called out sort of homophobic and trans behaviour, particularly within the Black community. So it applies to all communities. But if you're an ally, you can't sit down and just have a cup of tea and say to someone, well, tell me how it went for you. You've got to be in that space to challenge. And I could talk about that a little bit later. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to give a kind of a bit of a historical political perspective and how it relates to the workplace. You know, it'd be kind of remiss not to acknowledge that we've come to the end of Black History Month, but actually people are still organising events even now, and they call it Black History Month season, to be quite honest. So the season starts at the end of September, and people organise events right up to January, February, and then you have International Women's Month, and then that leads into Pride Month and LGBT History Month as well. So in terms of the historical perspective, this is quite important, because if you look at the history of activism, particularly around race, LGBT people and trans people have always been as part of that campaigning. If you look at the civil rights movement, there were prominent LGBT activists working with Martin Luther King and the Southern Baptist Church movement. We all know about the history of Stonewall, but that part of history, they never talk about the central figures of Black trans people involved in that campaigning work. And Jacqui talked about intersectionality. The concept of intersectionality came from Black women in many ways. So some of these concepts that we use around EDI have come through partly through the Black struggle as well. And if you look at the history of the Windrush generation, we all know that Empire Windrush ship docked in Tilbury, 22nd June 1948, and often the story is always about straight Black men and women coming from the Caribbean and other parts of the Black diaspora. But actually, there were also LGBT people who were part of that journey. And it's taken years, in many ways, to try and write those histories back into the history of the LGBT community. And when I've done my campaigns on Black history, I've always acknowledged the importance of that history. So when myself and my colleague, Dr. Angelina Osborne did a book, 100 Great Black Britons, based on the campaign that we did some years ago. It was important to make sure that the intersectionality of the Black experience, which again is influenced from the work, people's experiences in the workplace, is in that history. So I'm very proud that we've reflected that in highlighting a number of prominent people who have made a difference in shaping Black identity in Britain, who are also LGBT. This is quite important as well, because we don't want to, and we have fallen into the trap when you present history or perspectives or even narratives, that it's a very straight, narrow, non-inclusive way. And the Black community is guilty of that too. So part of my job as an ally is to try and correct that and to challenge that at times. So, and I think that's quite important. And this applies also in the workplace. Part of this history of the LGBT community, you can go far back to the history of enslavement, the transatlantic slave trade, and and the horrors of that. And it is part of that history as well. So I think it's important when we have conversations about race, we never ever forget the LGBTQ perspective in that as well. So when it comes to issues around the workforce, it's interesting because if you look at staff surveys, this time of the year, staff are completing their staff surveys, whether working in the NHS, local governments, or in the private sector or big front sector charities. You always never get the LGBTQ experience in that for a variety of reasons. Either people don't feel safe or comfortable. It's even in a survey to articulate how they're feeling, how they're being treated by their employers or their colleagues. Secondly, there's still big levels of underreporting of people who in terms of their identification for HR purposes. Again, a whole variety of reasons that people don't feel safe or comfortable in sharing that. But thirdly, the data always kind of misses out those the nuances of intersectionality. It's very similar if you use the concept of BAME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic. That phrase, BAME, covers everything that is non-white, including the whole aspects of sexual orientation and identity. So when people say BAME people or BAME, it's actually an affront because it does not look at the nuances and the lived experiences of a whole variety of people. And, if you remember, during the height of Black Lives Matter resurgence back in 2020 with the murder of George Floyd, which was an international phenomenon. I remember Black Lives Matter was driven by women, Black and lesbian women, who were the key drivers of that as well. And I remember being at an event a few years ago where a number of straight Black men didn't like the idea of Black Lives Matter because of that very issue. It was Black lesbian women that were at the forefront of articulating and campaigning, often on behalf of straight Black men, ironically. But some guys didn't like that. They felt affronted by that. And this is part of the challenges that we still have to deal and tackle that stuff as well. So if you remember during 2020, there were the fall of the statue and Colston statue in Bristol. Boris Johnson was more concerned about the statue of Winston Churchill than anything else, along with the EDL. And because of COVID, he was forced to commission a report looking at issues around racism in Britain. Well, the expression was actually used called racial disparities. They approached Tony Sewell to write the report, and as you know, that report 18 months later was discredited for a whole variety of reasons. But the report didn't even talk about the LGBTQ experience in itself, because the report's premise was there is no racism in Britain. Britain's a model country around equality and diversity, and therefore, if there is issues of racism and discrimination, it's your own misfortune. That was the way that the report was written. So the report was completely discredited. The only thing that a lot of people, commentators, agreed with the report was don't use the word BAME as a descriptor. And I think this is quite important. So obviously, people are looking at different expressions, global majority. I prefer black and racialized. I'm old school, I'm activist campaigner. But the point I'm trying to make here is when you start to use these big generic labels, especially in the workforce, it masks and hides the inequalities of discrimination faced by LGBT communities, whether they're from Southeast Asian, African or Caribbean or other racialized communities. It just simply ignores that. So when I've done work around equality diversity. I've been brought into, for example, local authorities, where for either through the trade unions or black workers groups, people have called out a local authority being racist. And I've been asked to look at that to either clarify, confirm, is that the case? And obviously, most times it is the case. And then I've had the opportunity of interviewing LGBTQ staff to get their lived experience. And often how it works is they might have heard about me, they might have known some of my work, and they might feel confident in having a one-to-one conversation with me. And the kind of things they've told me is I've interviewed gay black men, trans and lesbian women, and I say to them and ask these questions: you've experienced these racisms, these microaggressions in the workforce. Can you give me what types of microaggressions? And some of the microaggressions they face are no different to what a black or Southeast Asian or racialized person would say. The usual stuff around intimidation, bullying, harassment, stuff around hair, stuff around where you're from, stuff around, oh, you speak very well. All the usual tropes which all people of color face. But on top of that, when people make homophobic comments, they don't feel that they should challenge that. And one of the reasons is because if they challenge that, it means that it forces people to come out. And that shouldn't be the case. People should come out when they feel to come out, not because they've been put on the spot and you have to fight or raise an issue as well. So that's one of the key areas where people raise that. The other aspect people share those experiences is about the environment. So if you've got an environment which is toxic, you can't bring your psychological self to work, irrespective of who you are. It's even more of a double barrier if you are black and racialized in the workplace. And, people say that, we're trying to create a nice, you see all the corporate values and mission statements and behaviors which organizations have, but most people don't either follow that. There is, going to the point that Jacqui's raised, the people used to use unconscious bias training, but actually the Equality and Rights Commission and some academic research have found that unconscious bias training does not work for two main reasons. Everyone's conscious of their biases, all of us are. And secondly, the training is a short-term fix. It's a one-off training and that's it. Some of those trainings are actually done online, like a tick box exercise. It's about having courageous conversations. That's what we need. And I don't think in 2023, sadly, we don't have those courageous conversations in the workplace around the whole aspects of intersectionality and the impact of harm, hurt, slights, and microaggressions. We've actually come a long way, you can argue, on one level. I mean, who can remember, it might be of a certain age, in the 1970s, there was Bernard Manning. He was a comedian based in north of England, in Oldham, and there was a popular TV program called where lots of white comedians, it was all usually white comedians, making homophobic, racist, sexist comments. It was seen as good banter then. It was seen as just fun, but we now know that that banter harms people. It undermines people. It scars people, and obviously, lots of organisations now are working towards having clear zero tolerance policies on that. And even on TV, you will not see those types of programs unless you're on GB News. That's a different story. You won't see those kind of programs. And similar programs, I mean, the Black and White Minstrel Show, if you come of a certain age, you have to work where you had white actors, performers, dancers, having shoe polish, and doing caricatures of black people. Lenny Henry actually used to be on the Black and White Mitchell show, and in his memoirs, and talked about this to Lenny, I've met him quite a few times, he talks about the embarrassment of the black person being on a TV program with white people trying to be black, you know. And these tropes apply not just to the black community, these tropes apply to different communities as well. And definitely in terms of the stereotypes around LGBT characters on TV programs, on soap programs, reinforce those tropes as well. So there is a work that we need to do around changing the narrative. When it comes to the workplace, how do we deal with the issues of microaggressions of all sorts? How do we work towards creating a culture that people feel safe to work in? And how do you become, or how, if you are an ally and you recognize that you want to do something, what do you need to do? Ultimately, this is about inclusive leadership. When I've done work with organizations around anti-racism, chief execs and directors, and people say to me, "Oh, Patrick, can you tell me the best organization in Britain or anywhere in the world that we can learn from to be anti-racist? We want to be anti-racist." And I say to them, you know what, with all due respect, I don't know any organization that is complete anti-racist. I can tell you organizations that got good policies on talent management. I can tell you organizations that's got good policies on staff networks. I can tell you organizations that got good policies in terms of retention and career development and setting targets. I can't think of a complete organization. So what I do instead, and even this applies to America as well, by the way, who have been doing this longer than we have in the UK. So what I do, I do an exercise with teams, senior leaders, to work out how inclusive are you as an organization. So let's look at, so one extreme is in central London, that still exists, by the way, you have these private, inverted commas, gentlemen clubs. Some of these clubs going back from the time of enslavement, where business people meet in these gentlemen clubs, men only. Ironically, those clubs are exempt from equality legislation along the royal family. Think about that one. And if you're a person of color as a male and you're a billionaire, you might get a membership if you're lucky. But maybe those clubs, that's where you can argue all the kind of decisions are made in British society, in these private smoke-filled rooms of men, white men of a certain age. Then you have if you look at the trajectory of anti-racism, you might have organizations that might have a policy on EDI. They may have policies of tackling discrimination, but they don't know how to implement it, which causes even more frustration and anger and for Black and racialized staff. Then you might have organizations that might have a policy, have a strong leadership steer, but they're still working around co-production, how to co-produce and how to work with staff and beneficiaries that from their services. But I can't come across a truly anti-racist organization. I have to go. Sadly, I'm into sci-fi. I'm a Trekkie and all that kind of stuff. So yeah. So if you go back, like Star Trek, even the Romulans were invited to the party as part of the Federation. But actually, even in Star Trek, they didn't really talk about LGBT issues anyway. So that's another conversation to discuss. But what's interesting around this futurism stuff, it's quite important because some of the leading thinkers around Afrofuturism, which is a concept of imagine a future free of racism discrimination, have been people from the LGBTQ community, because they're trying to imagine a world free of the isms and schisms that we experience every single day. And this is quite important because I think when you go to look at issues of tackling racism in the workplace and its impact on LGBT and other racialized and intersectional communities, you're going to create a vision of hope and aspiration. If you talk if you talk to peers of mine who are about the same age as me, who are LGBT, they will talk, they have a different experience of race and discrimination compared to people in their 20s and 30s. Part of that reason is we've had to literally fight for our rights in this country. LGBTQ people were involved in the riots, Brixton riots, and the uprisings. It wasn't just simply straight black youth. We were all involved in that. If you look at the history in Britain of race equality legislation, from the very first act in 1965 to where we are now, LGBT people have been involved in that struggle, not been given the recognition or the respect that they do, but they have been involved in that struggle. And ironically, if you look at all the kind of legislation on the 2010 Equality Act, which covers race discrimination, recognising now civil partnerships, recognising sex discrimination, we've got, ironically, the best equality legislation in Europe, and maybe you can even argue in the Western Hemisphere. But we're only implementing about 20% of the current law. And the question we need to ask ourselves, if we've got the best legislation and policies as a country, nation states, compared to our European counterparts, and definitely half of America, because some states in America are going backwards, why is it that we're not implementing that? Why is it that in 2023, people are still skating around the edges? Why aren't people taking seriously the public sector equality duty, which applies to all aspects of intersectionality, not just race, but all aspects of intersectionality? Why is it that on the positive action part of the equality legislation, which is about kicking down the doors to create greater equality of opportunity, we're not implementing that? I know on this call, there are some of you who are probably working in the field of EDI, trying to advise your organisation the best way to do that. We have the best policies and legislation already. We've got a framework, a legal framework. Despite what you might hear from the rhetoric of the current government, this is the law. They can't turn around and say that structural racism does not exist. It does exist. We know it exists. There's enough evidence. It's also enshrined in the law. But yet we are told, or we've been drip-feed to be told that it's not relevant anymore. Outrageous. One of the roles I have, I chair an NHS organisation, and I was with a group of black women in Birmingham a couple of days ago, and some of them have been campaigning for the government to say seriously about maternity. That we know the data that 5 times more about in terms of black women dying around maternity. These black women and other black women have come together, had meetings in Parliament, have meetings with ministers, and arguing, can we have targets to ensure that black women don't die disproportionately compared to white women? But this government's not interested in that. And the reason why I'm not interested in that, because it's seen as woke. The work that we are all doing on this call around fighting for a fairer society, a more inclusive workplace, is all woke as far as this government's concerned. But you know what? If you look at the history, the arc of history, we are on the winning side of that. So I just want to say to any of you on this call, you might have challenges in your workplace, trying either a staff or implementing policies through your work. Don't give up. There's enough of us out there in this area to support each other. And I think there's enough of us out there to work together to ensure that the voices and lived experiences of the LGBT workforce is promoted and acknowledged and supported. This is really important because it's quite easy for people to get picked off. And the first thing that's always goes when it comes to the wider equality area is race, which means also that the LGBT black voice will also be dismissed as well. That's why I have a lot of respect for Phil and the UK Black Pride, because what they said to the mainstream LGBT community, we matter, we have a voice, and we can party better than you can. And they certainly do, actually. I always go to the events, support what they do, and it's great that a lot of allies attend that and support that. They were in Olympic Park again for the last couple of years, which is fantastic. Saw Neil there and others, and it's really great. We need to create our own spaces. That is what the UK Black Pride is saying. We need to, if we don't create our own space, if you can't give us a space or allow it into your space, like those private gentlemen clubs in Victoria, Sloane Square, Chelsea, we will create our own space. Thank you very much. So, and if you look at the demographics of Britain, when you like it or not, Britain is changing. It's critical and really important that, especially for young people, young LGBTQ people, feel that if they are going to work for a potential employer or go to university or whatever it is, that they feel valued and respected, because they're going to be the future leaders. They're going to be the future decision makers, the future consumers, and the future voters of this country. And, the Voice newspaper, they just recently done an opinion poll. They interviewed of a few thousand Black people, including a number of Black LGBT young people, about, did they see themselves British? 1 in 6 Black people do not see themselves British, and over half of them feel that they don't feel valued and respected of being Black British. Yeah. So we've got a lot of work to do in this area, but we can do it together in unity and unison. That's how we've been able to have the best legislation in the West around equality, but we now need to implement it. We need to make sure that we implement all aspects of the equality legislation. We need to make sure that you have the confidence to challenge the naysayers, to say that you're all woke, and all the naysayers that equality does not work. All the research work done by McKinsey, PricewaterhouseCoopers, mainly done in America, some done here, demonstrate if you get it right on race, you will get it right for all the protected characteristics. Why? Because if you look at the history of struggle of the Black community, particularly in America and here in the UK, the LGBTQ community have always been part of that struggle. And so if you get it right for race, not only will you get it right for women, for men, people with disabilities, but also for the LGBT community as well. That's why we have to work together. And in terms of allyship, just to conclude, I don't want to, allies is not about someone who reads a good book around our lived experience and becomes an expert and tells us what they know about our lived experience. I don't want to hear that stuff anymore. So I'm sorry, I haven't got time for that. What I want to see from an ally is that you are at the forefront of challenging homophobic, racist behavior, language, culture, people's careers being blocked in the workplace. That's what I want to see. No more platitudes, no more performative, I care about Black people, I'm supportive, blah, blah, blah. We want you to step up. Because you know why? I'm tired. I'm sure Jacqui's tired. I'm sure all our people speaking it are tired of carrying that burden. It's not even our burden, but why are we carrying it? It's a shared responsibility. Let's work together and make sure that the voices in the workplace are valued and respected and articulated and given that recognition that it deserves. I'll stop there.
Patrick, I mean, I've got shivers. Thank you so much. What a note to finish on. There are going to be, I know there's going to be some comments in the chat box. We've got a couple so far. So Nicole says, I'm loving this so far. And every time someone says to me that something is woke, I say it wasn't funny then and it's less funny now. Nat says Black British isn't often an option on ethnicity forms. People have to identify themselves as Black Caribbean, Black African, or use Black other option. No wonder they don't see themselves as British. Britain doesn't value them, referring to your comments about the voice. Verity says, great passionate speech from Patrick, great session. So thank you. Keep those comments coming in. We're going to dip back into them. If you've got any questions for Patrick, there's one in there already, but we're going to come to them shortly. I've got so much to go through, and I'm really glad we've got time. to do so. Again, I talked about mic drop moments earlier, and this was littered with them, and I'm going to jump into those. Courageous conversations where we talk about the impact of harm, hurt, slight, and microaggressions. How do you start a courageous conversation as someone that goes through that? You know, as a queer person, I go through it, and understanding the different layers of intersectionality. We know that for different people, it comes at different stages, and the degrees of it varies across. How do you start that courageous conversation to bring people into this aware sphere where they get it?
It's obviously it's going to vary from organisation to organisation. I mean, the first thing is about creating that space. You're going to create a safe space because you want people who, you know, if people are, one of the reasons why we don't have those courageous conversations, Neil, is people don't want to say the wrong thing. If I say the wrong thing, I'm going to get court-martialed and all that kind of stuff. We need to create a space where people, even if they make faux pas, say the wrong things. We all do. You know, we're not all experts on EDI. Not all of us. We're human beings. We have to learn. One of the key aspects about this work is all of us is learning. It's almost like we need to have a accreditation of prior learning from the age of 5 up to 80, that we're learning all the time. You know what I mean? About all aspects of being a human being. So we need to create a space where people feel that if they say something that's not appropriate, that they can be, you know, challenged in a critical but positive way, and to say, you know what you said there, that hurt me. I didn't like that. But you know what? I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt because you didn't realise that. I'm bringing it to your attention. I'm here to, you know, but for next time, just be mindful of that, like what you say or how you communicate will offend other people. And if you offend people like that, then you're not going to get the best out of me in my workplace. Why should I put myself out on the line for you when you treat me in that way? And that is the reason why, if you look across a whole range of sectors, a lot of staff don't put themselves forward anymore because they've been beaten down, not valued and respected. So it's about creating that environment, that space for those conversations. And when people start to be open about that, then you can build on that. So we need to move away from this training stuff. Training is very artificial. I mean, there's certain types of training you need to have, certain clear aspects of training you need to have, but it's actually, we should be focused on conversations. And if you bring in food's a good leveler in those conversations. So it's not a very dry, arid conversation in between the teams meetings. It's something that's natural, evolving. All of us need to have inquiring minds and
Sure.
be open and be non-judgmental. So that's what you need to do.
I think it's about being curious and being willing to get it wrong, but not being divisive with that. You know, you can ask a genuine question without being divisive and antagonistic.
No, absolutely, and but the problem is that people don't want to do that.
No.
So the more conversation we have, if you look at the demographics of Britain is changing. So we've got no choice but to have those conversations.
Get comfortable being uncomfortable. It's also this whole thing that people think they're going to get bashed down if they get it wrong, and actually we see that with pronouns. People are like, oh, I don't want to assume, and I don't want to get it wrong, but like you said, if you get it wrong, it's fine. No one is going to have a go at you if you make a genuine mistake about wording or something.
No, absolutely, and I think most people are like that, but obviously you do have elements of people who are just basically racist, fascist, whatever you want to call them, and you know that will be dealt with differently. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and they don't want to learn. They don't. There's no point in correcting them or arguing with them because they genuinely don't want to learn. Luckily, I think that most people do. You can take most people on a journey with you to awareness, but yeah, Nat's just said, I think we see people being bashed down a lot on social media. That's why some people are scared to say something wrong. And you can correct people with kindness and empathy and compassion and help bring them along on the journey. It's all about how you do it.
Absolutely. I think social media is a very difficult one. You can't really have a courageous conversation on 200 characteristics, you know what I mean?
Yeah, you lose nuance, you lose tone, you lose the gentleness with it. Yeah, absolutely. Creating your own spaces, you talked about that. Create our own spaces, thank you very much. What do you think is the general problem with X specific spaces. We see it a lot with Pride. Oh, what's the point in Pride? We don't have a straight Pride. And then you see it within the LGBTQ community. I've had a couple of friends say, "Oh, why do you have a Black Pride?" What is people's resistance to this?
It's no different to people saying, "Why do a Black History Month?" and why
Yeah.
do I mean, it's the same. You know, it's almost why can't you just fit into what we're doing? No, it's about how we fit in together.
Mm.
It's the issue. And if I don't feel valued or respected, or I have to conform in a particular way, then why should that has an impact on your mental health and well-being? I'm sorry, I haven't got time for that.
Yep.
I haven't got time for that. You know, so if organisations or structures or campaigns or initiatives um, don't recognise this diversity and this inclusion agenda, and don't change some of the way that they engage and conform, then of course people are going to be excluded. People vote with their feet.
Mm-hmm.
So so that's part of the agenda, not just for um, UK Pride, but all mainstream thinking institutions. I think UK Pride is an institution now. It's great. We've got it. So if it needs to change, it has to change.
Yeah. And it does need to change. It's not inclusive.
Yeah.
Yeah. You talked about gentlemen's club. It still feels in 2023 like we're living in one big gentleman's club. And we see the difference in countries that have female leaders, in terms of kind of like, happiness and understanding and such. Why does it still feel like we're living in one big gentleman's club, do you feel?
Don't forget, we've had female leaders. We've had at least 3 female prime ministers. Don't forget that. With Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah. I mean, kind of like on a worldwide basis.
It's not while we're Liz Truss for about I don't know how many days. You know what I mean? So we've had female leaders. It's not so much about, it's about where they're coming from. You know what I mean? And that's the issue. I mean, obviously, people in New Zealand had a fantastic leader. She stepped down. I mean, I think one thing about the difference between female leaders and male leaders is with male leaders, we just want to carry on and go on and on and on and on, irrespective till we get dragged out, literally. In terms of whereas a female leader will recognise that I've done my time, I need to move on. And I think men can learn from that. To be quite honest, I think lots of politicians and senior leaders in business can learn from that, but they don't. It's all about power. It's linked. Yeah. The power and the privilege is all intertwined. So it goes back to that gentleman club scenario. All the power is in that smoke-filled room. You won't see any women there. You might see the odd person, male colour in there occasionally, but they're probably just as bad or conforming as well.
Yeah.
So when you hear the message, oh, Britain's changed, we've got the most diverse cabinet, we've got a leader, prime minister who is Southeast Asian, and they say this, it's about their politics and it's about their values. How inclusive are they? That's a question we ask ourselves.
Thank you. I'm going to try and get through quite a couple of bits now. I'm looking for some practical takeaways here. You talked about history, and we know that history gets whitewashed. A lot of history gets rewritten, and there's a lot of erasure, particularly when it comes to the global majority, when it comes to queer people throughout history. How do people tackle that? And then when it comes to having the best legislation, but we're only implementing 20% of it, what can we all do about that?
Okay, I mean, obviously, I think a lot's happened over the last 10, 15 years. You've got more and more, particularly historians, writers and commentators of colour now, telling their story. I think in the last 3 years, I think mainstream publishers have spent the coffee, and all of a sudden they've been desperate to get as many Black and Asian writers, authors to share their biographies, historical accounts. So there's more books and it's more material now compared to the last 20 years, which is great. So there's no excuse. In 2023, there are no excuses. You can't say I didn't know. Because there's books, podcasts, a whole range of resource and material. But unfortunately, if you look at the national curriculum, it's still about dead white men.
Right.
That's the bottom line.
Right. And you're right. There's no excuse.
Dead white straight men.
Yeah. And places like Queer Britain, the UK's first LGBTQ museum, online information, there's no excuse for lack of awareness on that now.
Yeah, and I think with LGBT History Month, when it was launched in 2006, I was involved in that, and on my website, 100 Great Black Britons, I featured prominent LGBTQ activist campaigners as well. So I think LGBT History Month, it'd be interesting to see whether LGBT History Month has actually made a difference in educating and informing schools, the public as well. I mean, if you could, because in many ways, if you speak to the organisers of LGBT History Month, they looked at Black History Month and they said, well, they felt inspired by that. Last 4 years, you got the launch of Southeast Asian History Month.
Yep.
And I met the organisers of that, and they were, again, inspired by that. And the reason why we have these history months, because the mainstream does not acknowledge our history.
Yeah.
So as long as the mainstream does not acknowledge our history, long live LGBT History Month, long live Black History Month, Southeast Asian History Month, long live Gypsy Traveller History Month, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, we'll create our own. It's creating your own spaces. We'll do it ourselves.
Yeah.
Before we go on to the legislation parts, Nat asked a question in the chat, in the Q&A box. I'd be interested in hearing about LGBT people from the Windrush generation. Do you have any stories? And I know this is something we've touched on before in the lead up to this. Are you happy to share a bit?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So there's a good friend of mine. She's a queer lesbian historian, and she's done some work on one particular Windrush person who was involved, who actually helped some of the Windrushers settle in Britain in the 1950s. And actually, what's happened is, because of the 75th anniversary of the Windrush docking, there's been more and more conversations about the history, the LGBTQ history, in events and activities and program. If you go onto the website windrush75.org, which is, I'm involved in that, I chair the network, you'll see lots of events and activities, which has happened this year, but there's more events happening as well. So I think there is more. I think, to be quite honest, what we need is more books on this. I think because over the last 5 years, there've been more books on the history of Windrush, but it's still about, straight about men, not enough about women, Windrush women. And now I think we need to really, this is, I'm making a call out here. I think we need a really fantastic, comprehensive book of, actually what we need is a history of the struggle. I mean, I know Ruckus, they've got the archives at London Metropolitan Archives, which capture some elements of the LGBT struggles, particularly in the Black community in the 70s and 80s. But it'd be fantastic if someone could write a really comprehensive history book from the Middle Ages right up to now around an LGBTQ perspective. That'd be really fantastic.
That is a call out to all you historians out there that are interested in this. Get involved. It's yeah. Patrick, I just want to jump into that equality section. Like you said, there's a lot of EDI professionals on here, and when we look at we're only implementing about 20% of current law when it comes to the Equality Act. What can we all do individually to progress that?
Well, there's two things. I think within the current legislative framework, we've got Section 149, Section 151 of the Equality Act. So Section 149 talks about public sector equality duty, and I think already a lot of people are doing work around that. And unfortunately, what happened when the coalition government came to power in 2010, they introduced what was known as the red tape challenge. What they said is, actually, you don't need to do all aspects of work around equality for all the protected and non-protected characteristics covered. You can just choose one or two. But unfortunately, that meant that a lot of people dropped race completely. And it was only since the murder of George Floyd and the resurgence of Black Lives Matter 3 years ago that race is back on the agenda. My fear is race is now slowly going off the agenda again. Why is it that we can't be consistent? It's about the consistency. So the challenge, I think, for EDI leads, the burden's always on you. You're the ones coming up with the solutions all the time. It's actually it's a solution for the whole organization and for the top leadership team. They've got to take responsibility. Yeah, your job is to provide the technical assistance and support and advice, but it has to come from senior leadership. And senior leadership does not consistently take on board the wider EDI agenda for the all protected characteristics, and they're just selective or they're not bothered. That is why we're not implementing. It's about the consistency. That's something that we can do. One of the areas where we could do more work on is Section 151, and that is about positive action. Positive action, it's not positive discrimination, even though there are exceptions in the law around discrimination. So, for example, certain posts that's advertised where you might need a community language, or like some work in a women's refuge, there are descriptors where it's very that is a degree of positive discrimination. If you remember, until recently, the Labour Party, they for the last 15 years they introduced all women shortlists for parliamentary seats and for council selections. Last year, the Labour Party stopped doing this because 50% of the Labour MPs in Parliament are women. So therefore, they used that part of the law to do that. So there's things that we can do around, and positive action is about, you can't have targets, but you can have aspirational goals. You can look at, if you've done your survey and your analysis work, you find out that there are areas where there's a glass ceiling where staff of a certain background, protected characteristic, are not progressing in your organisation on a particular grade or role. You can create the opportunities for mentoring, leadership development, and people are doing it already. But it's about the consistency of that. It's not good doing it for 2 years and say job's done. It's a consistent program.
Yep. All of this needs a consistent, sustained approach. It can't be reactive. It can't be performative. Patrick, we need to come to an end. There's a couple of things you've said. You've said how you actually don't know any organizations that are not anti-racist, right? We've seen charities called out over the last couple of years, you know, from being systemically. We've got a country that says it isn't, but we know for a fact it is. But you've also left us a really positive message around don't give up. Monroe Bergdorf, London Trans Pride, recently spoke about how it feels like the right are getting louder because they're actually losing a grip on things, and change is going to happen.
Yeah.
And you said how you want allies to be at the forefront of challenging isms and phobias and all that crap.
Yeah.
What would be your final parting words of, like, do you feel that that progress and change is happening, and what words of inspiration would you give to people who do sometimes feel like it feels a bit overwhelming?
So in the final battle scene of the Rise of Skywalker, Luke Skywalker, where they had the final battle against the Empire, or there was a scene where, so how can we deal with this? You know, you had these small little martyrs of these little speckles attacking the Empire with their big start, with their big ships. And basically, when someone said, there's more of us than them. There is more of us fighting all aspects of social justice, racial equality, EDI, inclusion, LGBT rights, you name it, than them. That's why we need to be inspired by each other. We need to work with each other and take fortitude. We're not a minority in this game. We're a majority, but we're made to feel that we're a minority, and that should give us the courage to fight for another day.
Another mic drop moment, and I'm so glad you managed to squeeze in your love of sci-fi into that. Patrick, thank you so much. We're thrilled to have you here. I hope there'll be lots of thank yous coming. We hope to see you soon. Thank you so much.
Good pleasure. Thank you again. Thanks, Neil, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you, everyone. Stick around, Patrick, because I'm sure there'll be some comments coming through in the chat box. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in for the first couple of hours. I'm just going to launch a quick poll. I know that we are keen to have a comfort break. So I'm just checking in. How are you doing so far? Great, thanks. Loving it so far. Or it's a lot. I need a breather. And please, I do encourage you to go and take that breather, grab a coffee, pop to the loo, do what you need to do. Do you feel like you can be your authentic self in the workplace? Yes, absolutely. Kind of. I'm getting there, or not so much. We'd love to hear from you. new, please do take a break. We will be back at 11 a.m. for our panel discussion. Please continue to share your thoughts, your comments in the chat box. It's really wonderful to see them. Patrick, there's some more coming through for you, so do check those out, and we'll be back with you in 10 minutes. Thanks, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you've managed to have a nice break, even though it was quite short. Thank you for sticking with us. I am just going to launch the results of the poll. And so the majority of you want to ask, how are you doing so far? Most of you have said, great, thanks, loving it. And then, well, do you feel like you can be in yourself, your authentic self in the workplace? Half of you said, yes, absolutely. Just over half of you, 45% of you said kind of, I'm getting there. And a few of you said not so much. Well, I hope that today is able to empower you to have those courageous conversations that Patrick was talking about earlier, and really, really kind of like get to the heart and feel inspired by our speakers today, so that we can flip that narrative for the few of you that are getting there. Thank you again for joining us. I'm going to stop sharing that now. We will have another poll at the end. But we now have our panel discussion, and I'm just going to start bringing our panel through for you to meet. We're going to be joined by a fantastic lineup of speakers, Jacqui, who you met earlier, as well as some new faces. So across the series, we have had fantastic guest speakers, and today, as I said earlier, is no exception. And I'll hand over to Alex, who's our host for today, so that everyone can introduce themselves. We'll be in discussion for around 45 minutes, allowing for plenty of time for questions at the end. Please keep those questions and comments coming through. We absolutely love to see them. Share your thoughts and comments across social media. Doing so helps to bring these really, really pivotal conversations to a much wider audience beyond just today. And these are crucial conversations. We need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We need to, put active allyship into action, just that. So please do keep on sharing. Just a reminder for our panel and our audience, if anyone does need to take a few minutes, if there is anything that is hard hitting, please look after yourselves during this. We want you to feel comfortable and supported and enjoy the session. This is a safe space for everyone, and we want to keep reaffirming that. So we have a fantastic guest host for this panel discussion, Alexandra Dessar. Alex is Head of Diversity and Inclusion at the King's Fund, a health-focused think tank and charity that shapes health and social care policy, as well as being the CEO of House of Pride, a platform for queer women and non-binary people to grow personally, professionally, and creatively. Alex is also a public speaker with a background in finance and tech. In 2021, Alex was recognized as one of Involve's top 100 LGBT future leaders and Diva's Visible 100 top 10 LGBTQ women in tech. And in 2022, she was named Young Entrepreneur of the Year by Diva magazine. Alex, just giving you the big shout out there, because you're going to get to do that for everyone else shortly.
Neil, you missed out that I was an actress as well. So
that can go exactly. So I missed that one. So yeah, many hats, as all of us do. We know we've spoken a lot today about kind of the day job and the gay job. And Alex, you've got many, as I think most of us on this panel probably do have. And you are in great hands with Alex. So I'm going to be back shortly to support with the Q&A. But Alex, for now, over to you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Neil. And I hear that about day jobs and gay jobs. I very much try and make all of my jobs as gay as possible. That's what I try and do. Whether I'm acting, I honestly, the amount of roles that I am in, that I have just created this secret background of a queer character and just infiltrated the TV show. That's my aim in life. But this is not about me. I'm actually joined by three incredible people to talk about intersectional pride at work and beyond, because as we know, those lines now more than ever really kind of are blurred, crossover, work bleeds into home life and vice versa. So I will introduce very briefly Anthony Francis, who is currently a senior manager in the group technology office at Lloyds Banking Group. And I believe you were the first LGBT intersectionality lead at Lloyds. Is that right, Anthony?
That is right, Alexandra. Yeah, a few years ago now, actually, I started led on that role, and I'm coming back to doing something similar to it now within the group. So yes, fun.
I'd love to hear, before I introduce our other lovely two guests, I'd just love to hear a sentence about what an LGBT intersectionality lead means in the context of your organisation.
That is a good question. I think for me, the reason that role came around, actually, and the reason that we kind of initiated that was because there was a lack of, when we put on LGBT, this is not a sentence, so sorry, it's not a sentence. When we put on sort of LGBTQ plus events, there was a lack of diversity in the room. And I often found myself that I would be the only sort of person of colour going into these events. So we really wanted to make sure that we could bring sort of a number of communities together and feel represented and discuss broader topics. So that's kind of what we aimed to do as part of that initiative, Alex.
Thanks so much. And then we have Eva Echo, who is an activist, a writer, a public speaker with a focus on transgender rights and mental health. Welcome, Eva, to the space. Anything you want to say as in addition to that? Are you also an actress? Did I miss that out?
I have done some casting calls, but I wouldn't call myself an actress. I'm also director of innovation at Birmingham Pride, one of the directors at Trans in the City, and I sit on the Crown Prosecution Service's hate crime panel too.
Wow. That's incredible. Thank you so much. And Jacqui Rhule-Dagher, who is an associate at Hogan Lovells International LLP, I believe. I think you're also part of Hogan Lovells UK Pride Network Steering Committee and the Law Society's LGBTQ+ Solicitors Network, and the founder of Legally Lesbians. Is that?
You've done your homework, Alexandra. Yes, that is all. That's more. I'm not an actress, but courtrooms can get pretty dramatic. So yeah. That's my claim to the acting world.
Yeah. And could you just tell us a tiny bit about Legally Lesbians, please? Because I love the name, and I'm sure I'll love what you do.
Yeah, so I founded this back in April during Lesbian Visibility Week, which was founded by Linda Riley in 2020. And I basically got 25 lawyers to write about lesbian visibility and the importance of their careers and the importance of role models. And I'm just proud that I could do it because it's something that I really needed when I first entered the legal industry.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you very much. So let's get started with the questions. Actually, just a bit of, when I say intersectionality, I'll start with a question I didn't prepare you for. When I say the word intersectionality, what is something that springs to mind for each of you? It could be a word, it could be a sentence. I don't need a definition necessarily, but what comes to mind when I use the word intersectionality? Start with Jacqui.
Can it be a quote?
Pardon?
Can it be a quote?
Yeah.
So I like to use Audre Lorde's, there's no such thing as a single issue because we don't need single issue lives. I think that's what I think of when I think of intersectionality.
Love that. Thank you. Go backwards, Eva.
Being quite a neurospicy person, for me, I always see it in a very visual kind of way. So I always automatically think of Venn diagrams. And for me, particularly, some circles are a lot larger than others, and where they all intersect, they all do come together, but some sections are still slightly larger. And it's recognizing that, at any particular time, certain struggles, certain parts of our identities need a bit more focus than others. But we can't forget about the others either.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. And Anthony?
Yeah, I guess for me, like when I think of intersectionality and when I try to explain this to other people, I think of someone who's made up of maybe multiple identities, and each one of those identities could face oppression from the world around us. So I guess that's sort of how I think about it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So just in the taking that multiple identities thread and running with it, obviously we're all made up of lots of different parts of ourselves. Maybe, Eva, as you mentioned, some identities might be more prominent in certain situations, certain days. And I know that there are, in the workplace, it can be quite tricky to balance everything at once. Sometimes you bring more of a certain part of yourself than others. Are there any occasions for any of you that particularly stand out in the workplace where you felt like you can be fully yourself? Maybe it was the first time you were able to fully be yourself or felt comfortable being yourself? And are there any instances where you haven't? So where you may have had to second guess and think, oh, I'm not going to come out in this particular situation, or for me, I'll start off because I don't like asking things I can't answer. I, for a long time, had Alex without my pronouns in my email signature because a boss told me that if people thought I was a man, I might get a higher response rate. And so that's something I changed afterwards, but that was a reality. And then for me, for a while, a good few years, and then I thought, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. People can engage with me however they want to engage with me. So I'll use that as an example. But who wants to go first? Should we start with Eva, because we haven't started with you yet.
I'm quite fortunate now that I work with a number of organisations where I can be myself. So, for example, being Director of Innovation at Birmingham Pride, I can be as queer as I want, and it's absolutely fine. And that for me is so liberating, because previously, when I was employed before I came out working at a law firm, I found the environment, the culture to be quite oppressive. Everything was very focused on career moving forwards. And back then I was suffering microaggressions just for being East Asian. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, if people are really struggling with that and judging me for that, then there's absolutely no way I would be able to come out at work, let alone be able to offer a bit more of myself. And I found that, when I left that, I was looking back on it thinking I was never my full self. And in that situation, I wasn't able to put 100% into my work, because my queer self, all of my intersections, it's who I am, it's how I think, it's how I act, it's how I interact with people. So I need to be able to bring that into the workplace. And ever since leaving employment and going freelance and working with other organizations, I've always made a point of seeking that out and making sure that I can be myself.
Yeah, a question came into my mind there, Eva, which is, do you think you could ever, not that you would necessarily want to, but do you think you could go into a full-time role, as it were? So say, for example, a substantive post like Director of Innovation at Birmingham Pride, but in a non-queer organization. Do you think that's something you could do?
That's a really good question. And to be honest, that is something I have thought about for quite some time. And I guess yes, because I've been empowered by amazing people like yourself, everyone on the panel, all the people I've met, where I've seen them creating change in environments where you would typically think, you're not going to be able to even make a dent in that. So seeing people being able to do it, and also learning about myself and having had the chance to thrive, I know that when I go into a full-time employed role, it's on my terms, and it's no longer I'm having to to fit in with the culture. I'm happy to go there and say, this is my full self, I'm bringing it to work, and it's up to everyone else to fit around me.
Right, thanks, Eva. And speaking of environments where you might think you can't really make a dent, let's move over to the law firm. And Jacqui, how have you navigated your career in terms of feeling like you can be fully yourself or not in certain situations?
Sure. So I think it's important for people to know that when I first entered the legal industry around 8 years ago, I was very, very much in the closet. It was very traditional, very homogenous, very conservative. As Eva said, basically, it was just get on with your work, try and progress, keep your head down. There was certainly a sense that things would be hard enough for me by virtue of my race without throwing my sexuality into the mix. But over time, as you get more confident, meet more people, and significantly seeing other lesbian lawyers, made me realize that it was possible to progress in my career. And so a stand-up moment for me happened last November, when I was sat on a panel with two LGBTQ partners, and we were encouraging students, 100 of them, to enter a career in law. And I was proud that I could be the person for others that I needed to see when I first started out.
Thank you. Do you mind me asking, don't want to talk about this, that's fine, but that decision to come out at work, what empowered you to do that, or what was the moment of change for you?
Seeing other lesbian lawyers, Alex. because I could see that actually people weren't really interested in their sexuality. They were just really focused on their timesheets and not really what they were doing outside of work, which is a good and bad thing. But as I said, it's become, I think you mentioned earlier, the lines are becoming a lot more blurred, and we are now more genuinely interested in what people are doing in their spare time, their hobbies, what sets their soul on fire, really. Because when you allow people to have their side hustles, if you like, they're better at their jobs, they're happier, they're more fulfilled, they're more real, if that makes sense. But yeah, for me, seeing other visible lesbian lawyers was a big turning point. Sorry, I'm sorry. What are you going to say? Sorry.
No, okay.
No, I was just going to say I'm yet to meet other Black lesbian lawyers. So yeah, I'm trying to encourage more people to come out.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I was just going to ask practically for anyone on this call as well who might be in that sort of situation where they think, actually, this is an okay environment for me to come out. What was your first step in that space? Was it speaking to one of the lesbian lawyers who you encountered, or was it going to your line manager?
I think it was just a gradual thing, gaining confidence, having conversations with other lesbian lawyers, seeing other people thrive in their careers. And as I said, as you get older, you have more confidence. And I think one of the big things was building my own community, meeting other like-minded people, not necessarily in the legal industry, but other people who were in the city and successful, and seeing that actually most right-thinking people, and I use the word right-thinking very deliberately, didn't care about my sexuality. Of course, there are still some people who make a big thing out of it, but I don't pay attention to them.
Yeah. And thank you very much, Anthony. Any experiences that you've had either being fully yourself or not?
Yeah, I guess so when Jacqui said that she's started her career 8 years ago, it made me smile because I joined Lloyds about eight and a half years ago, I think. So maybe at the similar points, and at that point again, I didn't tell my team that I was gay. And I always try to think of why, and I don't know why, but Jacqui, when you were talking in terms of like, it was enough that you were Black. Actually, I think at the time it's kind of like that's true, and you kind of already different in one sense, so you kind of don't want to be different again, and you kind of want to navigate being Black in a large organisation where most people are white, let alone be sort of different from an LGBTQ perspective. But the team were really nice and really friendly, and similar experience. On a Monday morning, for example, you would lie about where you went on a weekend, and I felt like such a fraud because I was always in heaven, right? So I was always in heaven every weekend, and I always say, "Oh, I went to this place, it's random pub or whatever it would be," because it's really easy for just to stumble upon somewhere random. I live in London, or lived in London, so yeah. But then, actually, for me, to my journey to coming out at Lloyds Banking Group was I was going to. I'd been to London Pride. And I actually took a tweet with someone else who was a person of colour, took a photo, sorry, of a person of colour, and tweeted, and I've used a hashtag Black and Gay, and that tweet that went into, like, a print screen of it went into a pack that they were sharing around stakeholders, that someone asked me if it was fine to do. So I said it was fine to do. I thought, it's not going to land with anyone I know, right? So that's fine. So that all kind of went on. But then the Friday before Brighton Pride, so usually about 4 weeks later or something, I was obviously feeling very, very happy and confident. And I shared it around, I emailed that pack from London Pride around the team to say, oh, I'm actually going to Brighton Pride this weekend, and here's a platform like London Pride so you can see what people did. And then I closed my laptop and then went to Brighton Pride. And then Sunday evening, I was like, oh no, like, what's it going to be like in the office in the morning? And I remember there's a specific colleague as well who was quite religious, and we always used to get in quite early together. And I was thinking, what is Helen? Her name is Helen. What is she going to say? And actually, when I arrived to the office, and then she arrived just shortly after, she kind of said, "Oh, I saw you, Patrick. Good for you." She said, "Good for you." And I wasn't quite sure what she was saying "good for you" for, but I knew that it was okay, So then, but at that point, the rest of the team knew. And I think for me, off the back of that, that's when I got involved with our LGBTQ plus network, which really gave me an excuse to start talking about my sexuality to people, because I could talk about what the network was doing, I could talk about different things. And you talk about, I think people talk about moments where they can breathe out a little bit, where they don't have to like hold it in. And for me, that was kind of like one of those moments where I started breathing out at work. And I think at work, I haven't started breathing in since, to be honest. I do lots of different things sort of around an LGBTQ plus network. It is called Rainbow. So I do lots of things with that network. And I think for me, being my authentic self is really just about kind of being visible for other people, to kind of like to learn from, to reach out to be curious with, that type of thing. Yeah, I don't think there's ever a room that I am not my authentic self in that. Sometimes I am too much of my authentic self, and I should probably. It's a great place.
Thank you, Anthony, and especially regarding heaven, and in our pre-chat beforehand, it sounds like we've got a lot in common, and we probably need to go on a night out together. So that's one tangible outcome of this panel. You've all mentioned, and we're very fortunate to have a group of fantastic queer people of color on this panel. You've all mentioned in that first question coming out and being embraced in terms of your sexuality in the workplace. But you've all also mentioned at some point in your careers, it's hard enough being East Asian, it's hard enough being Black in this environment. And I just want to unpack that it's hard enough for a second. As we know, in 2021, the government proclaimed that institutional racism didn't exist in the UK, but earlier this year, the UN actually declared the opposite. And we do see the impact of structural racism in the workplace through different things like pay disparities, the ethnicity pay gap, fewer opportunities, lack of inclusive recruitment, lack of representation and diversity at leadership, all of those sorts of things. I wondered if anyone wanted to unpack that it's hard enough already being a person of color in this space. Is there anything that you can say in terms of experiencing your lived experience of structural racism at work or in your careers, or alternatively, how you try to tackle it in your jobs? Whoever wants to go first can.
I think for me, early on, yeah, it's just people see your color before like the quality of your work, and you're judged for that, because when you meet someone, that's the first thing that they pick up on, and if they form impressions of that. And I found, especially at the law firm, when I was doing really, really well, I'd only been there for a few months, and I was already working my way up to deputy team leader and really starting to take charge of the team when our manager wasn't in. And that was put down to the color of my skin, that I was a swot, I was a brown noser, that, because of my background, that of course I'm going to do that. But it wasn't. It was just because I couldn't bring the rest of myself to work. So I threw myself into work. And it just happened that, those people in management positions liked that and thought that, this person's really hardworking. But it was really difficult to get people to see the other me, other than the color of my skin. And when we look at things like institutional racism, you only have to look at the social media, because, some of the comments that you see on social media, yes, they're outside of work, but those people all belong to a workplace. So if they're having those thoughts, those opinions, and they're throwing them out in a very hurtful and harmful way online, thinking that they're safe from behind a keyboard, they are the same people that go into their workplace and still have those thoughts. They just keep them to themselves because it's not, it's frowned upon to say them out loud, but they are still having those thoughts. So until we eradicate those sorts of thoughts and we get people to move away from those attitudes, there will always be racism, and it will always infiltrate the workplace culture through the back door, because we focus so much on policy, we focus so much on training, but essentially, that area that is untouchable from the workplace is the home life. And as you said earlier, things are bleeding together more and more, and therefore people are more likely to bring those harmful attitudes to work as well. We've seen it with the trans community in the workplace, people being outed, people really kicking up a fuss because they don't want to share a toilet with someone that's trans, or that someone that they think is trans. So yeah, it's definitely there. And for a government report to say it's not, who are they asking? At the end of the day, if the people are saying it happens, it happens.
Thanks, Eva. Anthony, did you?
Yeah, I'll share some for you. And obviously, it's a really interesting question. And when you're just reading it out, I'm obviously very conscious that I work at Lloyds Banking Group. In the bottom left, it also says sponsored by Lloyds Banking Group, but they've not told me anything I can and can't say. And I said that I'm always more authentic self. So if you see me on LinkedIn looking for a job later, then please watch. But I think at Lloyds, so for me, institutional racism is racism that's embedded within like systems, policies, and things like that. Okay, and for me, I don't really see that kind of stuff at Lloyds. I don't see it. I think, would you say, is there anti-racism stuff embedded within our policies? We're trying to be an anti-racist country, so I'm sure we've made movement, but I don't really see the systematic thing there. But I think in an organisation that has more than 50,000 colleagues, there has to be racism within. Well, there is racism within pockets of those areas, within the individuals. So I think that's the challenge, and I think kind of like dealing with that. And I think when you've got someone who's the only Black person or only Asian person in the team, it's really difficult for them to call out that is what's happening in that area, for us to be able to jump in and help with that. So I think that's one of the challenges we have. And I mean, you can look at the disparity with pay and stuff like that, but we don't have it within pay within people at the same level. But what we do have a challenge with is getting people to a certain level in the first place. So that's where the blockers are. So for us as an organisation, like some of the things that we're trying to do to help with that and to maybe surface any racism or any issues is stuff around. We have a race action plan, which kind of like set out our targets for Black, Asian, minority ethics. We have that to really surface and get people talking about it. Some of the things that I think white people have been fortunate of before in terms of that informal coaching or mentoring and stuff like that. Actually, we're offering that to Black colleagues, to our Asian colleagues, to really help them understand how to navigate a workplace. And sometimes I'll chat to colleagues and I forget that you don't know some of the smallest things. Like before, I chatted to a colleague and they didn't realise you could apply for a more senior job just on our internal like recruitment website. We use Workday, right? And it's kind of like little things, like I think little nuggets like that, which have stopped people progressing. So I think that's the kind of more of the challenge that we have as an organisation that we're really working on. And even actually, as you were just talking there, and you mentioned like Facebook and Twitter and like the comments people make on there. Internally, we have our own version of those things. And we've been on such a journey because I always find it fascinating that people put comments on there that have got their name written against it in their workplace. And I remember, like, I don't know, 6 years ago, someone put something on there and it'd just be like, okay, someone put something on there and it just stayed there and no one really did anything. And today as an organisation, that is not the case, So actually, like we'll talk to that person, or however we handle those sort of situations, but there's teams out there, the senior leaders in the organisation that want that type of thing stopped and dealt with. And I think that's where I can see the change within like a really large organisation that's been around for, someone will correct me, but almost 300 years, so I see really positive change. Yeah.
Thank you both for sharing. And both of you mentioned social media or some, an internal, your intranet, because ultimately it is individual actions that might either be enabled by certain structures or not be tackled by certain structures, but it is those individual comments, it is those things that sort of build up, and when we talk about microaggressions, they're often committed on an individual kind of one-to-one basis. So I just wondered if anyone had any examples of any interaction that they've had on social media or on their intranet or individually one-to-one, where you've maybe been able to challenge some of those microaggressions or preconceptions about your identity, either that went very well and either one person or both people learned something, or that didn't go so well. If you'd like to share that.
I'm happy
Eva,
to start.
I can see you. Oh, great, Jacqui. Yeah.
So a comment I often get is, "Oh, you don't look gay," to which I usually say, "Hang on a second, let me just pull out my pride cloak, fall to the ground theatrically like the ground, in the hope that you might believe me. And before, it used to really get to me because I was already fearing that I was too much, or as I said, too Black to be embraced by the lesbian community and too much of a lesbian to be embraced by the Black community. But over time, meeting fantastic people online, meeting colleagues, I realized there's many ways to be part of the LGBTQI community as there are varieties of tea. So I just remind people that we come in different shapes, different sizes, different guises. And when people say things like that, I say, well, what makes you think that? And I think that usually gives them an opportunity to sort of check themselves before they wreck themselves and think, actually, what makes me think that? It's my own biases, it's my own prejudices that make me think that. So yeah, that's what I usually say to people. And I think it's also important not to gaslight yourself. I think sometimes you may fear, oh, I'm being too sensitive, but actually, if it upset you, it upset you, and that's fine. And I think you have every right to, sort of explain to people why their comments are offensive. But yeah, some of those, I think "You Don't Look Gay" is the one that stands out for me.
For me, I get a lot of hate on social media, and I like to have a bit of a well, let's call it what it is. I like to have a bit of a troll. I like to have to see who's leaving these comments. And there was one particular interaction that always springs to mind in this sort of scenario where I don't normally engage, but this time I thought, you know what, I've got some time on my hands. So I had a look on their profile, and it turns out that they like a band that I also like, and they were talking about one of their latest albums. So in response to their hateful comment, I responded, setting the record straight about the trans community and how gender dysphoria is not, because you belong in a mental institution or anything like that. And then I also put at the bottom, by the way, I prefer their much earlier stuff. This was a much better album. Just leaving it out there just to say, you know what, I've had a look at your profile. I don't really rate you very much. And they responded about music. And this interaction, this thread went on and on where we were discussing music. And it's what started as this really hateful comment towards the trans community turned out to be a discussion of music. And we both parted having learned that, yes, I'm trans. Yes, they hate trans people, but we have a love of music, and that there are other things within our identities that we do have in common. And it's important to focus on those as well and recognize we are people. Just because you don't like the fact that I'm trans, that doesn't change, my love for music or anything like that. We still disagreed on, which is the best album, but that situation was completely diffused, and I've not heard from them since. So I'm assuming they're doing okay.
Wow, how interesting. Do you mind me asking what artist it was?
It was a German industrial metal band called Rammstein. They're very theatrical performances. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that story. Anthony, do you have anything either on social media or otherwise where you've interacted with someone who has potentially committed a microaggression or been offensive?
I was just reflecting it there, and I was just thinking, I'm probably quite oblivious to a lot of it, to be honest, because I just don't care. I literally just, and on social media, I don't engage with people that I don't really know, so therefore I don't really get anything there. But I was trying to reflect on the last time that I got really annoyed when someone said something, and actually it was at London Pride this year, and there was someone. So I was there. There's a few of us obviously, and then there was someone else there who was from an Asian background and much slimmer and younger than me. All right, so very different looking to me. The only thing that was similar is our skin color. And so we were standing next to each other, and someone said, "Oh, you two look similar, or look the same, or something." And I'm thinking we look very, very different. And in that moment, I did not respond too well to that, if I say so, and not for me, it's because the other person was a colleague, as in the other person who apparently looked similar to me was a colleague, and I just thought, it's the first time that they come to Pride. They're new to this organisation. Would this person want to come back? Would this want to come back? If I had that when I first came here, would I want to come back? So I actually, managed to pull that person aside who said it another time, and just to let them know why it was inappropriate type thing. But they really hadn't thought it through. It's not like this person was intentionally trying to do something. They really hadn't thought it through. So it's a really good conversation to have after that event. But I mean, that's probably the last time that I felt really annoyed. But beyond that, I just I'm either really naive or just don't hear what people say, don't listen is what I do.
That's a good motto as well. And this the colleague who you were compared to, did you have an interaction with them? Did they say anything? Did you talk about the comment or not?
Yeah, and I actually saw them last Thursday, which is nice that I've seen them since and stuff. But yeah, they were also taken back from it, right? They're just like, okay, but for them, they, like I say, they're new. I'm a bit probably too confident at times, especially after London Pride March. I'm always too confident. And so I was able to speak up, but this colleague just did not feel really comfortable doing that at all.
Yeah.
But they're in a good place and they're enjoying life at Lloyds, which is good.
Great. And so Pride and for example, LGBT History Month, a lot of these, you mentioned being potentially more confident after these events, awareness days, because we are able to celebrate being ourselves and have pride in ourselves as well, and we're encouraged to by the organizations that we work for and the people around us. In the same vein, there are things like Black History Month. I know there's South Asian Heritage Month, and all of these awareness days around our different identities. What have either you personally or your organizations done to make these awareness days feel and be more authentic and intersectional? Let's start with Jacqui, because I went to an event recently at Hogan Lovells, which was fantastic and very authentic. So please do begin.
So a few weeks ago, I organised an event called the Lovells Festival, which was to celebrate National Inclusion Week. And I deliberately didn't do it during June for Pride Month or during Black History Month, because I wanted people to be reminded that we are ourselves 365 days of the year. So the theme was Dress to Express, which encouraged people to wear national dress or any other colours, textures, or patterns that represented their identities. I think one of the reasons why it was so successful is because it was very intersectional. I mean, there are lots of different people from the community who were there. And I think we need to be celebrating the LGBTQI community with all its nuances and complexities. And I think even within the community, it's important for people to understand what power and privilege they have. I think we need to be cognizant of the things that we can do to help and uplift other people who don't have our privileges. And I think it's a service to our beautiful community if we're always getting one perspective. So that's why I wanted the Lovells Festival to showcase the diversity of our community and the beauty and just the joy of the community. Because I think we don't often talk about joy. We talk about the struggle and the pain and the triggering things that have happened to us. But my God, we're such a wonderful community. And I just wanted to showcase that. So thank you very much for coming, Alex.
Of course, it was amazing. And I know that my favorite thing was the popcorn machine. But
not the 360 photo booth.
that was my authentic self, having 20 bags of popcorn.
I'm glad to hear.
Anyone else around awareness days and months and how we can make them more intersectional and authentic?
I think just speaking out and including others, like whenever we have these like LGBTQ plus calendar events, we focus on one specific part of somebody's identity. But if they're focusing on for example a trans person, we've got Trans Awareness Week coming up. For that period, you feel like you're made to feel like a bit of a superstar. Everyone wants to hear your story, everyone wants to book you, everyone wants to get involved actively. But being the person who is then in the spotlight, it's then it's up to me to then be able to say, well, hang on a minute, just because I'm trans, doesn't mean we forget about the fact that, I come from a very working class background. I'm East Asian. My sexuality, that all comes into play as well. And if we are going to focus on trans awareness, then we need to bring all that in, not just focus on my gender identity, because that is just one facet of who I am. We need to talk about who I am as a person, and that involves the intersectional talk as well. And it's also making sure that we have those talks and we carry on throughout the year. I don't stop being trans after Trans Awareness Week. We don't stop being queer after Pride season. So we carry on, and it's important that we make sure that our allies, those around us, carry on those conversations as well, and get into the habit of recognizing everybody's different intersections as well. So that if you're on an ERG or anything like that, then rather than just talk about sexuality, religion, anything like that, make sure you bring everyone and don't exclude anyone. And it's only by making sure we do it and we kind of put that focus in now that further down the line it just becomes second nature, and we stop to, we stop thinking about, do I need to do this? The answer is yes. Bring those people on board, and once that becomes a habit, it just becomes ingrained in how we behave.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Eva. And Anthony.
Yeah, Alex, when I reflect on this, I was just thinking that so at Lloyds we do lots of different events, and also being in London, you kind of get to go to a lot of different events, and sometimes the conversation is very similar, but I really enjoy sort of that conversation anyway. But one of the things that I try to do at Lloyds is like make the conversation a bit unique, in the sense that it draws people in that probably wouldn't usually engage with some of that stuff. And in particular, I think when I focus on some of the larger events, I always say focus on ethnicity and like sexual orientation, gender identity. So for example, like some of the events that we've done around that, I think it was last year during, was it last year or the year before, maybe in Black History Month, we did an event that explored the impact that I can never say this word, British colonisation had on LGBT plus inclusion today, and why actually in some of the countries where a majority Black people, there's so much homophobia because of the rules that we actually took. So like kind of like bringing that to life, and from that both parties sort of benefit from that. So the LGBTQ plus community learn, and also sort of our Black network or our ethnically diverse network are also learning from that sense. So bringing us together to build more allyship, to build more curiosity. We did an event earlier this year around Windrush and being sort of gay around in that sort of generation and those times, which was a really interesting event, and I love it because I learned so much, which was great to do. And just last week sort of we did an event which has explored, the title was called Black, Queer and Fabulous, and it was kind of like just trying to explore that. But the title kind of, I was really a bit worried because I used the word fabulous and I am not fabulous, right? So I was thinking, how do I make this fabulous? But it's a really, really good conversation where, as Eva was saying earlier, we could just explore people, their backgrounds, their sexual orientation, their gender identity, their race and so on, but we could just merge it, and everyone can take something from there to be an advocate for those people that are intersectional type thing. So I think those interesting conversations, I guess the only challenge and why we don't always have them, I guess, is because we can't always find those people to support. It's kind of like challenging, but Alex, in your introduction, was it the involved list that someone that at that time? Well, there's many lists that you've been on, right? So I think people can go to those lists and kind of find someone, reach out on LinkedIn, and I guess we find people that way. So whilst it might be a bit more effort, I think sometimes that effort pays off with the engagement, the curiosity, and sort of the further allyship we build within communities,
Yeah, definitely. I just want to pick up on some of the comments in the chat. The first is that confidence is fabulous, and I'd argue you are very fabulous, Anthony. So that was from Denise in the chat, and I think we would all agree on this panel here. A couple of other comments in the panel are around it's easy to forget that we are individuals, and within the LGBT community, within the Asian community, the Black community, it's easy to forget that we are complex human beings in our own right. Banning me about them, it's about adding to a family. That's how I see it.
Anyone else happy to come in? We can move on.
I think for coming out, I think I'd love there to be a point where it's not a thing, it's not a big issue. I mean, yeah, like Anthony said, there will always be parts where we expose elements of our identities to people, whether it is for a mortgage application or something like that. But for it to just not be a big thing, for it to be just accepted, and we need to normalize different types of relationships. We need to normalize different identities, and to move away from cis-het being this default setting. We need to move away from thinking that all babies are born straight and that somehow something happens to them. It's we need an open mind, and as we work towards a more inclusive and more diverse society, it's recognizing that we are just who we are, it's no big deal. But there are certain ways and certain groups who do need a bit more focus. But by and large, we're all people, so let's just treat each other as people.
To follow on from your point, Eva, I'm happy to now come out because I'm no longer ashamed of who I am. I think certain communities need to sort of see the journey and that it's possible, perfectly possible for them to come out as well if they want to. But I would love to move away from a heteronormity or people assuming that you're automatically straight and suddenly become part of the LGBTQI community. What about you started off as part of the LGBTQI community and then, you know, through some quirk became straight? So we need to sort of change our thinking around this.
Thank you. Our final question before we wrap up for closing from the audience is, I sit within an EDI group where we work lots of different things, but it feels like it's siloed, as we spoke about before, things not being intersectional enough. What advice can I take to the group to ensure that we take an intersectional approach and how we can better integrate intersectionality into our efforts?
Sorry, Anthony, you go.
I think, so for me, it just reflects on the thing that we spoke about earlier, Alex, actually, in terms of like, say, simply, I was probably where this person is at in terms of my thinking, in terms of like, we're just so like siloed and no one is talking to each other. And I don't know how your EDI group is set up, but if there's a work stream or if there's a person you can bring on that their sole focus is to look at that intersectionality thing and to challenge, if you're doing an event, it's their job to challenge you to make sure you've got a diverse or intersectionality people on that panel or involved with that. So I would say make sure that someone is responsible for that voice around your group. Sorry, Alex.
No, I think that's a great idea, and I think for me in my organization where I currently work as head of D&I, I've made sure to bring all of our staff network leads together in a regular meeting, and so every month we kind of go through the inclusion calendar, look at what's coming up, look at where the different groups can partner and work together. Some organizations choose to have it be mandatory as well, that your staff network group or an event that you're running you have to partner up with another group at some point during the year. So I've worked in those sorts of organizations as well. So just making sure that people are aware of what other groups are doing is half the battle, because then you don't have to replicate, and often you have more budget if you work together to put on a more spectacular event or training. So yeah.
To Alexandra's point, collaboration is a really key thing, but also getting feedback from any events that you're holding and giving people a safe space to ask questions. I think a lot of the time people are scared about saying the wrong thing or tripping themselves up, etc. But if we treat people with compassion and grace and accept that we're all going to make mistakes, I think that's going to be a better way for people to understand intersectionality and be more likely and willing to attend events and collaborate with other people.
I would say being bold with your content as well. Being bold with your content and thinking outside the box, because actually, you know, as Eva was talking about, you know, that those commonality experiences that can bring us together, sometimes that makes for great content when you think, oh, actually, this is going to really pique so many different people's interests. So yeah, that's just from an event manager's point of view, that's something that I definitely try to build in. I'm going to just launch our final poll. And this is going to be our closing poll. So just before we go into our final questions, what brings you pride and joy in the workplace? Being able to be my authentic self, supportive colleagues, brilliant manager, job satisfaction, company ethos, and opportunities for growth and development. You can answer more than one. Question 2, do you feel better able to support Black LGBT colleagues and queer people of colour as a result of attending today? 100% more able to do so, about the same. And how has this webinar left you feeling? Charged up, I've learned a lot and feel more informed. Unsure yet, I need time to reflect. We've covered a lot, so you know all of those answers are valid. While people are voting, just kind of want to throw 2 more quick-fire questions at you all. Let's talk role models. We all know that role models are super important, but actually as queer people, and particularly kind of like, you know, from the Black, queer and POC perspective, sometimes there's a lack of representation and therefore maybe role models. Who are your role models and how have they inspired you to be your best self?
For me, I think when we think of role models, we all kind of default to celebrities, those with big followings and things like that. For me, a role model is anybody who is daring to be visible, daring to go against the grain. And for me, we're all individuals. We all have our own journey. so it's, yeah, everyone that I engage with, everyone that I meet is a role model to me in some way, because I'm learning about them and I'm learning about their struggles, how they've got to where they are in front of me. And for me, that is inspiring. That's, for me, learning somebody else's story that I can take away and think, well, actually, this is something I'd never thought about. It's, that's the way we need to learn. And for me, like my best friend, to my wife, even to my dog, just how he just loves everybody. For me, yeah, it's everyone around me.
Anyone else?
I guess I was like, in terms of role models, always really cheesy, but it's always like people closest to me. So I think I would probably say like three really quickly. Is like, one is my dad. He's because he's a black man who moved to like a white area. He kind of like really learned how to. I think I take a lot from him in terms of dealing with people. Because some people could. I imagine a lot of people were scared of my dad at the time because he was the only black man in this area, and it's like, oh, so he had to learn how to adapt himself to make people feel at ease. So that was good. My mom, because in the same sense, for me, when me and my little brother experienced racism when we were younger, I feel like my mom also experienced. My mom is white, so my mom also experienced racism via that, because she was the one who was coming to school to stop it. She was the one who was, trying to stop comments in the street. She didn't have to do that. So I really love the way, like her mindset in that stage. And lastly, sorry, I would say my nan who is from Jamaica, because to get up and move to somewhere to really fight hard to make sure that your family can survive and thrive and all like in the world. And back then, like, she lives in Handsworth in Birmingham. It was not a nice place, and she tells me stories about whatever, so actually I just think that is like someone really determined and resilient in that situation. I think they're my three go-tos.
I loved what Eva said about having role models from all different kinds of areas, backgrounds, and even pets. But there's a role model at my firm. She lateraled over. She's a lesbian partner. She'd be embarrassed if I named her, but she's had an enormous impact on me, both personally and professionally. She's just blindingly intelligent, very selfless, very funny, very compassionate, and more importantly, being a lesbian is just one aspect of her identity. And it's just shown me that we LGBTQIA people have so much more to offer the city than our sexuality. We can be musicians, artists, whatever, really. And that's just one aspect of who we are. So yeah, she's my role model.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, it's so many people, and I think it's important to have, professional, personal role models. So one that stands out for me, I'm gonna borrow Anthony's, my nan, just because, and in a similar way to you talking about your dog, Eva, it's just someone who embodies lots of the qualities that I strive to emulate. So just love and compassion and patience in abundance. So yeah.
Thank you. I'm so lucky to work in the EDI sphere like this, because I get to work alongside all the people I consider role models. So thank you all. One last question. Queer joy is something we really need to tap into, particularly during what can be challenging times for the queer community like we're going through at the moment. With that in mind, what brings you joy, and what encouraging words would you like to leave our audience with?
For me, joy, when I reflect on my journey, how I got here to to doing the things I do today, and I would say to anybody who who is not out, who's out or has been out for years, anyone, just be your own kind of beautiful. There is no one way to exist. There's no, we're not carbon copies of each other. What works for one queer person is not the default. So don't be afraid to express yourself and go against the grain. We've been going against the grain all our lives before we come out. So why come out only to just follow the herd in another sense? Carry on pushing boundaries and just be you.
UK Black Pride, I think I mentioned this earlier, it brings me an enormous amount of joy, because it's just, as I said, it's the great excel. Seeing everyone just be free, happy, seeing Lady Phil on stage is obviously a huge delight. And it's just such a uplifting, healing and restorative space. In terms of a takeaway, I think sometimes when you're in the D&I space, it can get a bit disheartening when you think that things aren't moving in the direction that you want them to. So I'm going to end with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice."
Thank you.
I think, Jacqui, you mentioned UK Black Pride. I remember the first time I went to UK Black Pride, I couldn't believe there were so many like queer Black people.
Exactly.
It's like, where are these people? And that's just because of the visibility those people had when I was growing up, you know? It's like, so I love that. And shout out to Lady Phil, because she's amazing, you know? I think in terms of what brings me joy, just like earlier I spoke about the breathing out, you know, like when you breathe out. And I think now I just live the majority of my life just like breathing out. And I think it just makes me feel really privileged to be able to do that, joyful and happy, you know. So that's what brings me joy. I think there are two things that I'd probably leave people with. The first one, and I feel like we've all spoken about it here, but I really like live by the be who you needed when you were younger type thing. And I think, you know, we've all spoke about where we're supporting and helping people grow. And I think, you know, we probably all do that here, and I'm sure many other people do, but I think that's really important to do. And also just like I think nothing in life feels as good as when you're just being authentically you know. So whilst that is sometimes really difficult and not the easiest to do, I would just say I would encourage everyone to really live life being authentically them, because it feels so much better, you know.
Thank you. Alex?
Well, you asked for like takeaways, tangible takeaways. So I'm going to give you two. My dog and Christmas songs bring me an immense amount of joy. Started listening to them yesterday.
I say Mariah is out and about.
Mariah's out. Be defrosted.
Thank you all so much. I'm just going to share the results from the closing poll. So what brings you pride and joy in the workplace? The majority of you said being able to be your authentic self, supportive colleagues, and opportunities for growth and development. All of you felt better able to support your colleagues as a result of attending today, and 58% of you feel charged up, and 48% of you have learned a lot and you feel more informed. So thank you to our audience for being part of it. Thank you for your questions and comments. Great comments coming through. You're also inspirational. As an ally, I've definitely taken some great takeaways from today. Mark said thank you so much, learned so much. Panel, thank you so much. You have brought so much joy, wisdom and insight, and it's been a pleasure spending the morning with you all. Thank you, everyone. This has been the final installment of the Pride at Work webinar series. It's been wonderful. Huge thanks to our sponsor, Lloyds Banking Group. Yeah, hope to see you all very soon. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.